right? It's not like people aren't working or that they aren't filling out a lot of paperwork. This is before this bill. And it asks all kinds of stuff. Your immigration status, what you're doing, where you're working. They are filling out too much paperwork as it is. And for a party that's always complaining about paperwork, they're going to just put more on there because that's not the purpose. The purpose isn't to get people back to work. It's to kick people off of Medicaid. It's to not recognize the hard work of those that already are. Because as you put it, 92%? 92% of adults under 65 on Medicaid are already working or can't work because they're caregiving, illness, they're going to school. So don't tell us about work because we come from families that work. We come from families that get our hands dirty. We know what it looks like and what it feels like. And these are the people that we are working to protect. And I am very concerned about what they're going to do to indeed the people. When I go to my rural areas, when I went, to the dairy farms and talked to the people in my rural areas, and they said, we are the people who get our hands dirty, because they are, I represent a large rural district. They're going to get slammed, aren't they, Ranking Member Pallone? Because rural hospitals are going to go under. Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record. Medicaid cuts would threaten rural hospitals. And this is, Madam Chair? Yeah.
You finished the...
Yeah, thank you. I was going to go into it because I think it's really important that Americans who now have woken up and had their second cup of coffee, that they actually look at what's happening here, because it is really scary. In Pennsylvania, 12 rural hospitals, 24% are at immediate risk of closure from what you're doing here. In Michigan, 9 rural hospitals. Oklahoma, 24 rural hospitals. Several in my community as well. But if you are representing a rural area or a rural state, your rural hospitals are going to close. Because this is the thing. We're going to kick you off of Medicaid, and then we're not going to let you get onto the Affordable Care Act with the subsidies. Is that right? And so they're going to show up at the hospitals and not have any care, right?
Absolutely, and I want to explain why, because I'm not sure everyone knows that the CBO estimated that those 8.6 million under the bill that, or at least most of them, that would lose Medicaid because of the red tape, would immediately, or at least they would try to move over to the ACA and get a subsidized insurance policy under the ACA. But because of that, all of the savings that were going to be, go to the rich and the corporate interests under this bill would have been lost. Because if those people moved over to the ACA and got a subsidized insurance policy, the government would have to pay for their subsidy, and therefore there was no savings, or very, very little savings under the bill. And so then they put in the work, they put in the prohibition that if you were denied Medicaid, you could not go to the ACA and get a subsidy. You had to pay full freight, which of course none of them could afford to pay, right? So that is strictly to make sure that there's money saved to pay for the tax cuts for the wealthy and the corporate interests. That's the only reason that's in there. Again, it's not because, I think the GOP hate the poor. It's because they have to come up with this money to pay for the tax cut for the rich and the corporate interests. That's the bottom line.
So I think it's also, once again, budgets reflect your values. Chairman Moore, I was wondering if you happen to have the bill, if you would mind reading the title of section 106 on page 901, line 20 in the Rules Committee print. Oh, sorry, Chairman Guthrie.
I was about to say, you had made me a chairman. I was just going to say,
I didn't hear your
accept.
question then, I'm sorry. I didn't hear, I didn't know it was directed at me, I'm sorry. What, would you ask again?
Okay, if you'd go to page 901. Page 901, line 20 of the bill. Do you have the bill in
I
front of you?
don't have the bill in
Mr.
front of me, but
Here,
read the,
I'll pass this down to you.
okay.
Just read that one line. Line 20.
I don't think, that's not in my jurisdiction, I'm sorry, that's why I didn't know
Okay,
about it.
we can pass it. I think that was Ways and Means, actually.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is.
Chairman Smith, sorry.
Excise tax.
Okay, so what are you asking?
Would you please, so that the American public knows what this bill does, one of the little things that it does, would you please read page 901, line 20?
I think it'd be better if you read it.
Oh, he doesn't want to read it.
I've
I'll read it.
I know the
Well, actually,
legislation, but I'm not
Ranking
gonna be
Member Moore.
part of your little
Ranking Member
show
Moore.
here, so you can read it.
It was a question if you would read it, so I'll ask Ranking
I said
Member
no.
Moore to read the text. This is in their bill. They don't want to read a line from their own bill. Ranking Member.
I don't want to read the bill for you.
I'll help you out.
I am testifying about this legislation. I'm not going to read the bill to you.
Okay, I am,
Miss,
this is amazing.
Miss
We are
Lager
on-
Fernandez,
we-
shall I pass this back or shall I
No,
read
no,
it for
why don't
you?
you just read it?
I am a member of this committee. I am the
Line 20.
ranking vice chair of the committee. It says Section 111106, repeal of excise tax on indoor tanning services.
So they're repealing an excise tax on tanning beds. They're repealing a tax on silencers. At the same, so they're going to, okay, so if you have a tanning bed, you get a little bit of a tax break. And if you need a hospital bed in rural America, I'm sorry, you're out of luck, right? And I don't know where this particular provision came from. We do know that there are certain elected officials who appear to have a certain orange hue about them, that maybe they want to make sure that tanning beds get a little bit of special credit. But really, we are prioritizing tanning beds over hospital beds in rural America. So, you know, I do want to talk a little bit about the tax credit, the child tax credit. Because one of the things that is sad about the child tax credit, I agree that it should have gone on for longer. We fought, Rosa DeLauro has been fighting for that expanded child tax credit for almost her entire time here, and she is joined by so many of us on the Democratic caucus, I think all of us. Now, sadly, it didn't get extended, but it didn't get extended because we could not get the Republican votes to extend it in the way it was. And right now, what they have in this bill would actually deny the full value of the child tax credit to 17 million children because their families don't make enough money to qualify for it. Now, I don't know if the chair wants to answer any more questions, but maybe I'll just ask Ranking Member Moore, is that what's going to happen with the child tax credit? Is the families who need it the most won't get it? Well, does the child tax credit extend to all the families
So what
of
this
America?
legislation does, of the 17 million children that you're talking about, they're going to make sure that their refundability is $1,700. At the end of this year, it drops to $1,000. So we're making sure that they are staying whole of where they are currently. If this bill does not pass, those 17 million children will only have $1,000 child tax credit instead of a $1,700.
But there is a discrepancy. Representative Moore.
Thank you so much. And you know, Chairman Smith knows that that this is very important to me. This is the reason that I came to Congress. And so while I appreciate the fact that this committee has finally recognized that as an OECD country, we need to provide some kind of child supplement to children. I mean, everybody else has figured that out before we did. And while people want to give women $5,000 to have babies, I just think it's a lot more practical to take care of the children that we already have. I guess the thing that and we're going to get to talking about work requirements again, but as people have pointed out, about 96, 97% of people who are under the age of 65 and that receive any of these benefits they work. And if they're not working, they've worked the year before, they received any of these benefits. They worked a year after they've gotten it. And the 6 or 7% of people who don't work, as Mr. McDermott has pointed out, they have Mr. McGovern, have very complicated lives. They're taking care of elders, they're taking care of children. So if a woman finds herself in a situation, for example, where she, for whatever reason, cannot work, there are 17 million children who will get zero. And these are the poorest kids that there are. And they need support. It's, a child supplement is supposed to recognize that child rearing is expensive. The kids don't earn money particularly, but they need their Cub Scout uniform. They have sports equipment. They can't participate. I can remember growing up when I couldn't go on a field trip because I didn't have $5 for the bus fare. And we're going to leave them out. And, because of this work requirement, the poorest children, 17 million of them, who have no control over whether or not employers will provide their parents with work, parents who perhaps don't have a high school diploma. I know people who wouldn't hire people because all their teeth were rotten. And that wasn't a good look for working in the restaurant. And because of this work requirement, the poorest children, 17 million of them, who have no control over whether or not employers will provide their parents with work, parents who perhaps don't have a high school diploma. I know people who wouldn't hire people because all their teeth were rotten. And that wasn't a good look for working in the restaurant. And because of this work requirement, the poorest children, 17 million of them, who have no control over whether or not employers will provide their parents with work, parents who perhaps don't have a high school diploma. I know people who wouldn't hire people because all their teeth were rotten. And that wasn't a good look for working in the restaurant. And because of this work requirement, the poorest children, 17 million of them, who have no control over whether or not employers will provide their parents with work, parents who perhaps don't have a high school diploma. I know people who wouldn't hire people because all their teeth were rotten. And that wasn't a good look for working in the restaurant.
I do want to offer to my chairman of Energy and Commerce, Chairman Guthrie, to just touch on anything that you would like to cover out of the many accusations that have been leveled about the bill. But my one question to you, since high school diplomas were mentioned, if somebody doesn't have a high school diploma, then they might not be able to get a job per the work requirements that we have in the bill. Doesn't participating in some sort of education program count toward those requirements?
Yeah, if you're working towards a GED program, that would count towards your work requirement.
So if you want to go through, I'll yield time to you to cover
Well, thanks a
the
lot.
many accusations.
Thanks a lot, and I come from a product of hard work too. My whole life growing up, my childhood up through high school, my dad worked in a Ford foundry. That's pretty hard in Alabama, so that's pretty hard work when you're in the heat of the summer. So I come from that as well. And if you look at, they talked about the coverage loss. I always say, look at ineligible, illegal, and able. So if you look at the coverage loss that comes from the Medicaid requirement, it's people that aren't eligible to participate in the Medicaid program by the rules set up by people who voted for the Medicaid program. The other are the people that are not here in a legal presence, and the other is the able-bodied. And when we talk about able-bodied, well, one, I know that we talked about the maternal health program. That was actually bipartisan, I think. '70s, so we think we can do this. People have brought up Georgia and Arkansas. Those were problems. People were working and could not get Medicaid. And that is absolutely not what we want. That's why we took great pains to make sure we simplify the reporting requirements. People have due process rights. We want people to have Medicaid, but if they're not working and able to work, but we don't want to use the work requirement to deprive people of Medicaid. So we feel that is there. The other number, because they throw up 13 million, there's like over 5 million, but that comes from an expiring provision in the Inflation Reduction Act. And it was brought up by my friend from Wisconsin and others that, well, why don't we make all these other things permanent? That wasn't made permanent. It's expiring, and because it's expiring, that's where the 5 million comes from. So there were decisions that I don't know why y'all decided in the IRA to spend $32 billion or $27 billion on the Green Energy Fund when you could have made this last longer. And then my friend from Massachusetts talked about, well, this is for the well-connected. We had a hearing yesterday where there was a nonprofit that was started by a well-connected individual, had $100 in the checking account of the non-progressive forward, and got a $2 billion grant, which the CEO's salary of that is over $800,000. So she's getting paid 5 times a member of Congress to implement a grant appropriated by Congress. And if that's not well connected and run, and that's money that could have been spent for these. And with rural hospitals, I love to see when that article was written, because we really sat down, all of us, we got a lot of energy and commerce people here. I went to rural hospitals. It's urban hospitals. It's any hospital that has a high Medicaid population, which typically also has a high Medicare population. So the low reimbursement rates for those programs affect those hospitals. That's what we're talking about here. And if you look at an item came up that I didn't know as much about, state-directed payments. We sat down, and that's probably what they're writing about, because there were people saying that those should not stay where they are. And we sat down with hospitals, we all did, we looked, and we said, yeah, this really ups the reimbursement for hospitals that have high Medicaid so they can stay open. So we held harmless that provision. Now going forward, there's reform in it, but they held harmless. States said that they had difficult times with their budgets, and the provider taxes helped them get through. You know, President Biden called them a scam. President Obama wanted to be 3.5. So a lot of people know this is sending money up to match federal money. But we said, okay, we realized it would be a big burden on states if we took a big approach to it. So we held harmless. We said, we're going to freeze where you are. You can increase, but we don't want rural hospitals on the edge closing because we took away state-directed payments, because we lowered the provider taxes for states. And so if anybody's closing tomorrow because of this bill, then it means they were already going to be closing anyway, because this bill doesn't affect that. And then there were people that are eligible for Medicaid So on the ACA, so that was another one. So they said if you're on Medicaid and you fall off Medicaid, you can't go to the ACA. The ACA sets up the provision that if you have other coverage, you can't go on if you have other coverage. So if somebody has Medicaid, this is what our argument wasn't save money, but if somebody has Medicaid and the only reason they become ineligible because they are able-bodied under all the exemptions that I read, but they're able-bodied and they fall off Medicaid just because they won't work, then they shouldn't have the opportunity to go get a subsidized plan in another form. And so that's what that provision was there for. So this whole committee, Energy and Environment, we're all said we spent a lot of time making sure that we reform a program that's grown twice the size of inflation. I mean, one state has spent $26 billion more on Medicaid in the last 3 years. We felt it was unsustainable. We walled off, there's two groups, there's the Affordable Care Act. So if I'm a healthy Kentuckian and I go to the hospital, the federal government pays 90%. If I'm a disabled child in Kentucky, go to the hospital, the federal government pays 72%. Talk about values. But we have left that alone in our bill because of the states have budgeted and put their hospitals around that. So unfortunately, that's what was put into law under the Affordable Care Act. And so we looked at all of that. How do we get a handle on the growth in Medicaid and make it sustainable and protect it for mothers and pregnant women, mothers, children, the disabled, what the program was originally intended for, because most of the great growth is in the expansion population. And it was, I think this proposal well thought out. I received a letter from the Kentucky Hospital Association. I said saying that thank you for the path that you took, because this is something we can deal with. I sat with hospital executives when they listened to the rhetoric and they saw where I thought our plan was going, and I could say, look, this is where I think it's going. They would all say, wow, we can all live with this. So we've given a product that saves the program. It puts it on a more sustainable path. You know, it's still a growing program. It's going to spend over 1.1. We're going to spend $700 billion this year, 1.1 trillion, 10 years from now after this bill's in full effect. So we're not cutting Medicaid. What we're trying to do is deploy the resources for the people that need it the most and reform the program and let states have to take more responsibility in the future, but hold them harmless today so we don't have these hospitals on the edge, like my friend from Pennsylvania mentioned, on the edge, being affected by what we do here in the next few days.
So, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you. You did spend time with hospitals from my state, talking to them about what we were doing in this bill. I really appreciate the time that you took there with them and with many other members. Any member who had hospitals with questions, you took time to visit with, and we are grateful for that. I just want to make a few exclamation points on some of the things that you said. Medicaid alone is on pace to outpace defense spending. Medicaid alone is on pace to outpace defense spending. That's
it's going up from $700 billion out of $1.1 trillion under this bill.
That is not sustainable. And Mr. Chairman, what happens to the Medicaid population when we can no longer afford that level of spending?
Well, it's the fear when the interest on the debt just gets so big, it overcomes it all. And so I said to hospitals, a lot of hospital CEOs that I've talked to, yours and others, and I said, look, this is a beginning to bend the cost curve. This will be a much different conversation when we get to the point that we can't borrow money anymore because our debt's too high.
And
we need to have this conversation now because we can do things that's sustainable and can keep everybody operating. But we get to a point where we can't borrow anymore. It's a different conversation.
And we've been talking about safeguarding Medicaid for the people who need it most. Mm-hmm. You said it best. We are preventing the ineligible, the illegal, and the able from accessing benefits and taking dollars away from the very people who this program was designed to help. Pregnant women, children, the disabled, seniors. If we did nothing, would there be more or less money available to take care of the traditional population?
Well, if you think about it, if you're a state program and you get 90 cents, in my state you get 72 to 90, so 90 cents for one patient and 72 cents for the other, the incentive is there. I don't think it was intentional, it was to get states to expand, but now the incentive is there to spend more, have more access and care for the the higher reimbursement.
And finally, we are saving approximately $700 million in Medicaid over the 10-year window because of making sure people who are ineligible, illegal, and able are not accessing benefits designed for the people who
Well,
need
the
it
able
most.
access them if they work, but the
If
able
they
access-
work,
yeah, if
that's
they
right.
work, yeah.
But we're saving money, but we're still increasing spending in Medicaid. So when Democrats say we're slashing Medicaid, we're still increasing our overall spend in Medicaid over the window.
From
Is
about
that correct?
700 billion to 1.1 trillion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Langworthy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. A lot's been said here today. I would like to offer the opportunity for Chairman Thompson from my neighboring district to offer, in similar fashion, anything that he would like to rebut based on what's been said here today.
Well, I thank my neighbor to the north for yielding some time. I just want to start out by saying, contrary to the disparaging remarks we've endured today, based on fear, not facts, the goal is not to hurt those struggling in poverty. The goal is to fulfill the purpose that is in law of the nutrition title. In the nutrition title, as of the FRA, by the way, any of those who voted for the FRA were the ones that approved those benefits that we talked about for the homeless, those aging out of foster care, and veterans. You that voted for that were the ones that voted to have those expire in 2030. There was a question during some of the questioning of where that came from. So, but within the FRA, we obviously food security has always been a part of the nutrition title. Really important. But it has a dual purpose. It is officially codified and in law, and that is workforce development. That became a part of that purpose. And I would say we also, not in law, but my own personal perspective is we need to achieve sustainability of this critical program, and not to have cuts. And I've said all along, we've had that discussion in committee, and I read too often about cuts that are happening, and there are no cuts. The House Committee on Agriculture is leading efforts to restore integrity to the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. The committee's reforms ensure that SNAP works the way that Congress intended it to, going back to the 1970s. We're really proud of that program. It has been a program that has restored rungs in a ladder of opportunity for folks to be able to pull themselves out of poverty, while at the same time providing supplemental nutritional assistance. And the goal is, and we do that in terms of the program integrity in areas by reinforcing work. Those who can work should. And there certainly are plenty of waivers and provisions so that to address kids, the reason that it's always been 6 years and younger as a waiver on the general work requirements is because it was recognized that if you had a preschool child at home, that you would have to be able to care for them. It also applies if you have someone in your house that is disabled, including maybe a parent that you have to provide care for. Always those exemptions are there. But by reinforcing work, rooting out waste, and instituting long overdue accountability incentives to control costs and end executive and state abuse and overreach. Because when the executive branch, and specifically the states, do things the wrong way, it is the SNAP participants, those individuals, those families, are the ones that are hurt most. So the reason for this reform, it's intended to intent to supplement the food budget for low-income individuals. That's what SNAP is. The SNAP has ballooned in cost. Since 2019, SNAP rolls have increased by 17%. from 36 million to, in 2019, to 42 million. And a lot of that has occurred at the state level. And while the overall cost of the program has grown by 83%, ballooning from 60 billion to 110 billion annually. States do administer the program. They administer the program. There's a cost share for administration of the program, and the collectively, the states make $13 billion per year in erroneous payments, both overpayments and underpayments. And both of those hurt the beneficiaries, the people that we've been spending hours now talking about how do we help them. The national average error rate is 11.68%, and that has nearly doubled just since 2019. So what is the impact? Obviously, we all know what the impact is when it's an underpayment. That single-parent mom with 2 little babies the states are not providing sufficient assistance in putting money into their SNAP EBT card, and that's obvious how that hurts those families. But I will tell you that the overpayments, which there's more overpayments than underpayments based on the data, has even, I think, greater harm. If you're that single-parent mom with 2 little babies and the card gets charged, you're going to use whatever's on that card, and that's fine, because that's the benefits you were given, and when you go, and by the way, SNAP beneficiaries use an average of 2 to 3 forms of payment when they go. They're not using just SNAP. That's obviously supplemental to cash and to checks or debit cards. So how does the overpayment hurt them? Well, because the states will come back and claw that back. It may be 3, 4, 6 months later. Now, where is that single-parent mom with 2 little babies supposed to find that money at that point? That's where program integrity is so important. It protects, one of the things it does, it protects the beneficiary. It protects that single mom from that. And so the error rate by these states is completely unacceptable. And you know what? Why do they do it? Because there's no skin in the game. They don't have there's no accountability. They get the money, they execute the program, and if they don't do it right, which is with these error rates is a significant amount, I believe, Pennsylvania doesn't do it right. It's double digits. And there's a lot of Pennsylvanians that are hurt because of these error rates. And that's unacceptable. States have to do a better job. So what we provide is, we could have come in and just done a punishment, but we did a carrot and a stick. And we put it at just 5% cost share, but it's based on their error rates. And I happen to believe that looking over the past couple decades, every state can get their error rate down below to be at that 5% mark. Only 28% of able-bodied adults without dependents on SNAP have earned income from work. That's largely because of not because of the law that and the regulations that Congress passes and the executive branch writes, it's because of how it's poorly administered by the states. The USDA and states have intentionally limited enforcement of the SNAP work requirement for adult without dependent children, able-bodied adults, through waivers, leaving 40% of these work-ready individuals today under a waiver of the ABOD work requirement, and remaining on the SNAP rolls long after the 3-month time limit for compliance with the work requirement. So because of the SNAP benefit, unlike other entitlement benefits, is 100% funded by the federal government, there is minimal, I would say no incentive for states to control costs, to enhance efficiency, and improve outcomes for recipients. The gentlelady showed the Medicaid paperwork. That is not paperwork that comes, I don't believe comes from the federal government, because I know in the SNAP program, it is the states determine that bureaucracy. And there are problems with states that will take months in order to process those applications under the nutrition title. That's unacceptable, and that's why we need to hold states accountable. And I don't believe that, no state out there is going to cut SNAP benefits. You heard about the passion for that assistance on both sides of the aisle and here. And so I think you're being pretty much unrealistic and disrespectful to our colleagues that work in state capitals to think that this program would be any less important to them. And we're talking 5%, that I believe that they can all get there. So with that, I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Mr. Langworthy, would you yield a moment? I think, Mr. Thompson, you brought up a very significant word in your comments, and that's integrity. And what we keep hearing on our side is we want integrity in these programs to save them. But integrity, and we're hearing that these are moral programs. Well, integrity is moral too. And we want integrity in the programs so that we can save them. And I think you've just outlined that extremely well. And it's a word we have not heard enough of in this debate here, and I think probably in the committees, because we keep hearing about cuts when we're talking about having integrity in the programs. So thank you, Mr.
If the gentleman from New York will yield just a few minutes.
Certainly.
You know, we did not roll back the daily amounts that these recipients receive. There was an increase when the market basket analysis was done at the direction of the 2018 Farm Bill. And again, I agree, it's only like $6 a day, something like that. That amount was not rolled back within this, nor are we preventing going forward adjustments based on inflation, because that is the current law. And so I think those corrections are really important to make, and I thank the gentleman from New York for yielding.
And I yield back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Griffith, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You know, fake news, misinformation, it has long existed in human societies. And today we heard several folks reference Marie Antoinette and let them eat cake. She never uttered those words. As historians will tell you, there's no evidence that she ever said it. I understand the intent in which it was used, but she never said those words. In fact, the rumor, let me finish.
I just say you guys
The
make
rumor-
Marie Antoinette look like she's down to earth.
No, not going there. But the rumor that she said those words started circulating in the streets of Paris a couple of weeks after her head had been severed by the guillotine. And as everybody knows, the brain only functions for 2 seconds. Scientific data done at the guillotine by a French scientist showed the brain only functions for 2 seconds, 2 blinks of the eye subsequent to the head being severed. Misinformation is still out there, and sometimes it's both sides of the aisle that we start these stories or these rumors in the minds of people. And one of those that all of us have been guilty of is talking about work requirements related to this bill, because it's actually community engagement. So if you're going to school, as we've heard some testimony today, if you're engaged in your community in any way, going to school, getting a drug treatment program, it counts. Volunteering in your community for that 18.47 hours a week counts, or 80 hours. It doesn't have to all be done in a week. 80 hours over the course of the 4.33 weeks in a month counts. And so I heard, because we fall into that trap, I heard that, you know, how can you work when you need daycare? Well, you could be volunteering with the local daycare and count as community engagement. So we need to try to get the facts straight in this point in history, or else 200 years from now, they're going to be talking about work requirements when in fact it's community engagement. Just as we have heard today that Marie Antoinette said, let them eat cake, which she never did. Now, we have also heard other disparagements today which are not accurate. The gentleman from Missouri threw shade on the Energy and Commerce Committee earlier by saying that it didn't have great jurisdiction. Now, having heard some of this, I'm sure his opinion has changed, and knowing that in order for him to make final comments, he will need to be recognized by a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. I'm sure his opinion has changed in the last few hours as we've been debating this, and I would now ask the gentleman from Missouri if he would like to correct any things that are misunderstood that have been said today or that somehow otherwise need correction, so the historical record will be complete.
I want to thank the gentleman from Virginia for yielding, asking that question, and also for serving on a fairly decent committee. I appreciate the work that you all have been doing. You know, this bill is a bill for working Americans. I'm a product of the working class. Like I said earlier, I grew up most of my life in a single wide trailer, and then we upgraded to a double wide. My dad was one of those 199A employees that would benefit in this bill. He was the employee of one. He had a 2-car garage. He was the best transmission overhaul mechanic that you could find. And I was the first in my family to ever graduate college. They were the first in their family to ever graduate from high school. And so the community that I represent, my hometown where I live today, is less than 5,000 people. The per capita income is just at $24,000. $24,000 a year. My grandparents never had running water on the farm that I live on. I was the first one to drill a well, so we didn't have to use an outhouse. I understand the struggles of working Americans, and that's why for over the last year, Chair Fox, we have traveled throughout this country. We've had 15 different field hearings from a homeless shelter in Chicago to an Indian reservation in Arizona to the second largest port in Staten Island. We went all over this country to hear from real small business owners, real working moms, real farmers of the issues that they're facing in today's economy. And that's what this bill delivers on. This bill makes permanent what is expiring at the end of this year. Every individual tax rate will be made permanent. The 10% tax rate will be made permanent. Every single one. The child tax credit, which affects 40 million Americans, 40 million children. If Congress does not act by passing this legislation, you will see the child tax credit go from $2,000 to $1,000. To $1,000. That affects working families. The guaranteed deduction, which 91% of Americans use when they file their taxes, that gets slashed in half if we don't pass this bill. But guess what? This bill also increases that guaranteed deduction, $1,000 per individual. That's real tax relief for the 91% of Americans that use it to file their taxes. We also enhanced the child tax credit, $500, to make the child tax credit $2,500. Inflation's gone up a lot since 2017, and we're indexing it for inflation. We're also delivering on the promise that we made to the voters of no taxation on tips, no tax on overtime, tax relief for seniors, also allowing you to be able to deduct your interest from autos made in the United States. I'll tell you, the senior citizen who's an Uber driver is going to benefit the most from this tax package, because no tax on tips, senior tax relief, and also they can deduct their interest if that car is made in the United States. These are real impacts for real Americans. In fact, an average family of 4 under this tax bill will see their tax cuts of $1,300. $1,300. Where I come from, $1,300 is a lot of money in the paychecks of working families who are struggling just to get by. In this tax bill, what it does for small businesses, there's 26 million small businesses right now that are wondering, is their tax rate going to be 43.4% next year or 23 to 28%? And these are those mom and pops on Main Street that are just surviving. That's my parents' auto repair shop in Southeast Missouri. They're deciding of how to invest, how to grow right now with the uncertainty, and this bill will provide that certainty. In fact, we also enhance the small business deduction to 23%, allowing them to have more parity with the big corporations with having a lower tax rate as a small business owner. We also go after special interest tax provisions that were passed in the IRA. We eliminate more than $500 billion of bad green scam policies. And those policies will be redirected for the working class Americans, those tipped employees, those linemen working overtime, those seniors who are living paycheck to paycheck. That's what we're going to do with those green credits. We're also going to hold elite universities accountable. We're going to make sure that they pay their share of revenues coming from endowments. Corporate tax rate's 21%. The top tax rate will be 21%. If an endowment can have $55 billion, more than most countries, I think that they're not really paying their fair share. We're always talking about paying their fair share, but we're going to make sure those elite universities pay their fair share. It's the same way with woke non-for-profits. We're holding them accountable. We're also saving $140 billion in the tax code to make sure illegals aren't benefiting from the tax code. And this is all to deliver real relief for the average, everyday American who sent us to Washington for this mandate. I appreciate you for allowing us to be here today.
Madam Chair, I
Still
yield
your
back.
time.
I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Jack, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will engage Mr. Wahlberg. I appreciate your patience throughout this hearing. I can relate that it's a little lonely when you sit at the edge of the table, but would welcome any closing thoughts and comments from you and the incredible work that your committee members produced at the Education and Workforce Committee.
Well, Mr. Jack, I appreciate that. Bobby and I are feeling like Rodney Dangerfield down here at the end of, you know, I served on the Ag Committee, my first term in office. Great committee. Got a great Ag district that I represent. I served on Energy and Commerce up until I took the chairmanship of this fabulous committee. And I never wanted to serve on Ways and Means. It's not up to my standards yet. Now, I love you, Jason. I love you. I just had to get that in. But I do appreciate that. You know, education workforce, I don't want to belabor this, but we did some amazing work, I believe. $350 billion of savings that will, I think, foster better opportunity for students in higher education at lower costs. In the Northwest Ordinance, that's probably included in some of your state's constitutions, it says religion, morality, knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. I don't think we've been encouraging education as we ought to, and for that reason, my ranking member, Scott, and I, and Representative Neguse, I'll respond to your question, which was a legitimate question. We started at 10:15 in the morning on our markup. 5.5 hours later, after 33 or 34 amendments that we debated together, we completed it. And I turned to Bobby and I said, Bobby, what happened? He said, what do you mean? I said, it's still light out. I think that shows how a committee can work together to get things done, whether we agree or not on everything, and we didn't. But I think the passion is there for education. So what we did in this bill, seeing that right now, 40% of master's degree programs and a quarter of bachelor's degree programs leave students worse off than if they never started in higher education because of the costs and the debt that they have. Within the next 10 years, if we don't do something, we have $300 billion of debt to the students that they're going to lose over the next 10 years. Taxpayers lose 20 cents on every dollar that they lend to post-secondary education right now. That's not a winning formula. So in our legislation, Mr. Jack, we attempted to reduce from 5 disparate loan programs, some without, well, most without any limit on them, down to 2. And we put reasonable caps in for undergrad, for grad, and for professional grad students. Why did we do that? To give incentive to colleges, universities, trade schools, community colleges, to live within their means, and ultimately we gave them something they've asked for many years, and now they have the opportunity to counsel their students on the basis of what their program will afford to them once they graduate, what they should take as a loan and no more. For that reason, we have a chance to give them skin in the game, that if students come out at the end of the pipeline and they are paying off their student loan, keeping on track to do that, and they have advanced in their ability to earn, we give them a special carrot called a promise grant. If they don't, and the students are defaulting and not achieving what they ought to achieve, then we give them a portion of risk sharing to contribute, that carrot and stick approach. Bobby and I agreed on a very significant portion of the bill, and that's workforce Pell, short-term Pell. We know our manufacturing entities, our trades, need people in the jobs these days. And why not give them certification programs, apprenticeship programs, short-term degrees that we can use workforce Pell for, to bring them out of that pipeline with a skill, with a job, and without huge student loan debt. And Bobby and I are going to continue to work on other workforce programs to ramp up that deal, but we did get that into this bill as well. So I won't belabor the point, but that $350 billion of savings is all being put in to make it more accessible for students to come out of the end of the pipeline. We don't agree on all of that. I get that. But that's the approach, and I think in the end, we're going to see a better higher education system.
I wonder if the gentleman might give the ranking member a chance to.
Well, he already had a chance to address one of your concerns, but
a lot for him. I just heard a lot of references to Bobby.
Respectfully,
Mr.
Mr. Neguse, I reclaim my time, and I appreciate your comments, Chairman Wahlberg, and obviously appreciated your testimony throughout this hearing, Mr. Scott. And with that, I yield back to our chairwoman, Ms. Fox.
Madam Chair, can I publicly thank Rules Republicans for all those profound last questions?
You just did.
Just did.
Madam Chair,
Oh, excuse me,
I'd
Mr.
like
Scott.
to thank you and the gentleman from Colorado for your kind words about Jerry Connolly as the Dean of the Virginia delegation. Several people said very nice things, and I'd like to thank you for those.
I want to say, I think it's important we always acknowledge each other because we all work hard, and it's important that we do that, no matter the party. The next panel, thank you. I have an important announcement to make. To the members in the room who've been waiting patiently to deliver amendment testimony, I have a brief announcement about how we're going to proceed. Those of you who've been excused can go. We're going to begin with the leadership panel, but it will still be an amendment panel. Democrat leadership has asked to testify as a panel of 3 to begin with. But it's our understanding they will abide by the procedures of an amendment panel, meaning 5 minutes of testimony each. We will then move to calling up members to testify on amendments, 8 members at a time. We've been doing our best to monitor when members have arrived and are arriving. We're also doing our best to cross-reference our notes on this with the staff of our Democrat counterparts so we get it as right as possible. I'll be calling up the members 8 at a time. I've been patient this entire meeting, and I ask for reciprocal patience here. If you just walked in, you may need to wait for a 3rd panel. And for those listening who aren't here, you may need to wait for a 4th panel, and so on. Again, I'm asking everyone to be patient. We'll be identifying the members for each panel verbally. I believe if you are on the Democrat side, and I think everyone who wants to offer an amendment is on the Democrat side, you may talk to the Democrat staff outside about where you might be in the queue. Mr. Jeffries, I understand you want to address the group in terms of the loss of Mr. Connolly first, and then I'll identify you for your testimony.
Well, Madam Chair, thank you so much, and thank you so much for the moment of silence and the kind words of remembrance on behalf of our dear colleague, Jerry Connolly, who really was a member's member, someone who conducted himself with the highest degree of intellect, brilliance, resilience, integrity, humor, and wit. It's a great loss for his family, great loss for his district, great loss for the Commonwealth of Virginia, great loss for us as House Democrats, but certainly a great loss for the Congress and for the country, given just the depth of his representation, the relationships that he had on both sides of the aisle, on both sides of the Capitol, and the fierce representation that he provided to the people that he's been privileged to represent for decades. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some brief words of reflection on behalf of the House Democratic Caucus.
Well, I'm reminded of an old poem, "For Whom the Bell Tolls."
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Now, I'd like to recognize that we have Minority Leader Jeffries, Leader Clark, and part of the leadership, Mr. Aguilar, at the witness table for our first panel. So I now will recognize each of you. Will you be going first, Mr. Jeffries?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member McGovern, for the opportunity to testify at this incredibly important Rules Committee meeting. I also thank my colleagues, Whip Catherine Clark and Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar, for partnering with me on this amendment. Come before you today with an amendment to strike the unacceptable, unconscionable, and un-American cuts to the health care and food assistance of the American people. America is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We are better than this. The great American middle-class dream is that when you work hard and play by the rules, you should have the ability to provide a comfortable life for yourself and for your family, a good paying job, educate your children, purchase a home, and have access to high quality and affordable health care, as well as be able to put food on your kitchen or dining room table. Unfortunately, we are here today discussing a bill that would make that American dream harder to reach for millions by increasing costs for families, hardworking American families, and gutting the things that they need to survive and thrive. This reckless budget would take health care and food assistance away from millions of people in order to provide tax cuts to the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. It would hurt children, hurt seniors, hurt families, hurt women, hurt people with disabilities, and hurt our nation's veterans. If enacted, the GOP tax scam would represent the largest cut to health care in American history and the largest cut to nutritional assistance in American history in order to provide the largest tax breaks to billionaires like Elon Musk in American history. So let's begin with the health care component of this amendment. Everyone should have access to high quality and affordable health care in the United States of America. In 1965, Congress created both Medicare and Medicaid. In the intervening decades, Congress passed legislation to expand and strengthen these important programs. In 2010, this Congress, under the leadership of Speaker Nancy D'Alessandro Pelosi, passed the historic Affordable Care Act, which created new protections for people with pre-existing conditions and expanded health care for tens of millions of people who couldn't otherwise afford it. Since then, we have managed to achieve the lowest uninsured rate in history. Why would we go backward? Which is what the GOP tax scam would do. We know, however, that our healthcare system is not perfect. Too many Americans continue to be unable to pay their medical bills and struggle to get access to the care that they need. As Democrats, we are ready to work in a bipartisan manner to address these challenges, but we will never support any Republican effort to rip away health care from the American people. This GOP tax scam will force nearly 14 million people to lose their health coverage and cause millions more to pay higher copays, premiums, and deductibles. Hospitals will close, nursing homes will shut down, and people will die in all of your districts. Now, prior to the modern SNAP program being created in 1964, there was vast hunger and food insecurity across this country, including in low-income communities, rural areas, and communities of color. Thanks to public investigations, community-based organizations, and some good journalism, these challenges were spotlighted, and the need for an expansion of federal food assistance was highlighted. The American people were moved by images of children with distended bellies rummaging around in garbage and families going hungry. Finally compelled Congress to act. And over the last 60 years, we as a country have made significant progress to reduce hunger and help people afford nutritional food. Unfortunately, the policies in this GOP tax scam threaten to undo this progress and return us to an age where far too many children or veterans or seniors are struggling to eat and get access to the nutrition that they need. It's also important to recognize that SNAP is a vital part of providing opportunity for our farmers, who we stand with, food makers, small businesses, truckers, independent grocers, and the entire supply chain. So for the Republicans who have promised to love and cherish Medicaid, I ask you to support this amendment. For the Republicans who believe we should not rip food away from the mouths of children, seniors, and veterans, we ask you to support this amendment. And for the Republicans who believe that the gospel in Matthew 25 and 35 teaches us to stand up for the poor, the sick, the afflicted, the least, the lost, and the left behind, we ask you to support this amendment and strike these harmful cuts to health care and nutritional assistance. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the Ranking Member McGovern, the members of this committee. I am a proud co-sponsor of Leader Jeffrey's amendment, Protecting Medicaid and SNAP. And my Democratic colleagues have done an excellent job laying out how taking Medicaid and food from kids and seniors and veterans and moms to give tax cuts to billionaires while increasing our deficit is a triple threat to the American people. But unfortunately, it doesn't end there. I'm offering an additional amendment that strikes a provision that would defund Planned Parenthood. Speaker Johnson recently said about this provision, it is about going after, quote, big abortion. But he knows better than that. We all know the federal government doesn't pay for abortion care. We all know Republicans have already decimated access to safe abortions in this country. So what does this provision actually do? It further defunds women's health care. It defunds cancer screenings, prenatal care, postpartum services, fertility treatments, preventative care. 96% of Planned Parenthood's clinical work has nothing to do with abortion, but everything to do with serving millions of women, most of them overwhelmingly in rural and underserved areas, who are having a hard time finding reproductive care or any health care, especially in states with abortion bans. Faced with the choice of either breaking the law or breaking their oath to put patients first, OBGYNs are packing up and leaving. As a result, 35% of counties in America don't have a single obstetrician. In Georgia, it's 42%. In Texas, it's 50%. Clinics are shutting down while maternal mortality is on the rise. Infant mortality is up for the first time in decades. How does this bill respond to this Republican-manufactured crisis? It piles on. It makes it even harder for women to find health care. Without this amendment, it would shut down nearly 600 health centers run by Planned Parenthood, 64% of which serve women living in medical deserts. These are communities that don't have enough health care providers as it is. These are women who overwhelmingly live in rural areas. These are women that you represent. If Planned Parenthood is defunded, 7,500 South Carolinians will lose their doctor. All of them, 100%, live in a medical desert. 9,200 Georgians are on the edge of that same cliff, 75% in medical deserts. 22,000 Hoosiers, 82% medical deserts. 24,000 Virginians, 50%. 37,000 North Carolinians, 67%. 51,000 Minnesotans, 69%. And 118,000 Texans. Count on Planned Parenthood in a state where babies and pregnant women are dying at a historic rate. 2/3 of Texans live in medical deserts, and 141,000 New Yorkers are about to see 47 clinics boarded up 61% of them in the neediest areas in New York State. Millions of women are counting on their representatives to make the right decision. Women like Cheryl from North Carolina, who years ago was overdue for a pap smear, but she didn't have insurance and she kept putting it off. A friend mentioned Planned Parenthood would provide this free of charge. She booked an appointment, got checked, and it came back abnormal. They caught it early, and the cancer was removed. Cheryl credits Planned Parenthood with saving her life. A lot of stories begin like Cheryl's. They should all end in the same way, with health care that saves lives. I hope this amendment gives you all pause. When the women in this country deserve health care, and I hope you will think about the moms struggling to get by and stay healthy for the sake of their children and their families. It is not too late. Do right by them. Make this amendment in order for floor consideration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member McGovern, distinguished colleagues on the committee. I appreciate your kind words about our colleague, Mr. Connolly, as well, Madam Chair. I'm grateful for the opportunity to introduce amendments that would strengthen SNAP, a program that helps families across the country meet their basic needs. I'm also proud to co-sponsor Leader Jeffrey's amendment. State governments can't afford to take on the extra costs that this legislation would impose on them. It would force leaders in red states and blue states to either raise taxes or remove people from SNAP, leaving even more Americans hungrier and poorer. I wish more Americans had the opportunity to hear from our prior panel's testimony during the workday, but this committee made the choice to hide from the public and keep hidden what's actually in this bill. In fact, we're still told that managers' amendments are still being negotiated and are incomplete. It is outrageous that this committee is debating these policies under the cover of darkness, but it shouldn't be surprising. Legislation you intend to pass, started at some ungodly hour, kicks millions of Americans off their health insurance and takes away food assistance for families who need it most. As grocery prices rise, I cannot understand why my Republican colleagues want to take food out of the mouths of mothers, children, and veterans while making health care even more expensive. House Democrats are eager to take on waste, fraud, and abuse throughout the federal government, but we cannot find a willing partner on the other side of the aisle because of our colleagues' single-minded focus on cutting health care for people who need it most. This legislation doesn't make Medicaid or SNAP more efficient or more fair, Madam Chair. All this bill does is ensure that billionaires who have never had to worry about a hospital bill or putting food on the table can continue to pay less in taxes than a teacher, a firefighter, or a nurse. Madam Chair, it is a fact that only House Democrats want to make health care more accessible and more affordable for everyone. We will continue to fight back against this effort to drive up costs of health insurance and end basic needs programs just to make a group of campaign donors happy. The contrast is clear. House Republicans are making health care more expensive and less accessible. House Democrats want to ensure that every American can earn the peace of mind of a good-paying job with great benefits. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Aguilar, would you mind leaving your testimony with me? Because I don't believe I heard a couple of things that you said, and I just want to look at it before I make any comments.
Of course.
Okay, I want to double check that I heard some things that I think you said.
Okay.
Before I make any comments.
Of course.
I'm going to recognize, before I speak, I'm going to recognize any of my colleagues. Ms. Houchin, Mr. Langworthy, Mr. Scott, you recognize.
Madam Chair, I would just like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record an article entitled Rich State Poor People. And if I might,
Without objection.
if I might just read from it, the oil and gas boom has helped New Mexico has become the nation's second biggest oil producing state. Taxes paid on the state's oil production will generate, and in quotations, more money than we know what to do with, according to Democrat State Senator and Legislative Finance Committee Chair George Munoz. States are flush with cash that are well run. Thank you.
Without objection. Mr. McGovern, you're recognized.
Yeah. First of all, let me just address something that Chairman Smith said. He went through all the things in the tax section of the reconciliation bill that, quite frankly, most of us support. I mean, the child tax credit, the no tax on tips, the middle-class tax cuts. But what he omitted was the tax cuts for billionaires. What he omitted were the cuts to Medicaid that would throw people off of health care, or the cuts to SNAP. Leader Jeffries, I mean, we're reasonable. We're happy to work with them. But there's no way in hell we're going to support a bill that's going to throw 14 million people off of health care, or throw millions of people off of SNAP. Maybe you can maybe comment on how would children, how would seniors be impacted by the legislation that is before us?
Well, thank you, Mr. McGovern. This legislation would rip health care away from approximately 14 million Americans, including millions of children who will be adversely impacted by the fact that Medicaid is being cut in the greatest numbers in American history, children who would otherwise be able to see a doctor when they're sick but might not be able to as a result of Medicaid being ripped away. Children who will no longer have the ability to receive preventative care that could catch things early enough to avoid serious illness or death. They're impacted by the GOP tax scam. Seniors, of course, who will have their Medicaid ripped away from them, will also be adversely impacted because the majority of seniors who receive nursing home care in America or home care in America, these aren't statistics, it's our parents, our grandmother, our grandfather, our great-grandmother and grandfather. The majority of people who receive nursing home care in America or home care in America, which allows people to maintain dignity and respect in their amazing golden years, they rely on Medicaid to receive that assistance. And that, of course, is at risk of being ripped away from them. And Mr. McGovern, it's all being done in service of enacting the largest tax breaks for billionaires in American history. Billionaires like Elon Musk, who's the last person in this country who deserves a tax break.
And Ms. Aguiar, I support your amendment. Interesting enough, the House Agriculture Committee never did a hearing on the cost sharing issue with states. And there's a reason why governors all over the country are panicking that they may be hit with a bill of hundreds of millions of dollars or even $1 billion in the case of Pennsylvania, which they're not going to be able to meet, and therefore it will result in them costing, it will end up cutting the benefit to people. And so I support it totally. And Leader Clark, let me ask you, is it possible at all for other providers like community health centers to absorb the patients that Planned Parenthood health centers see annually? And what services for women would be at risk?
Thank you so much for the question, and let's bust this myth once and for all, because we have two things going on here. We have the nearly 14 million Americans, including many women, seniors, moms, pregnant moms, who are going to be have their health care taken away from them totally, and that impacts healthcare centers, FQHCs. They receive, Medicaid is the single largest source of payments, reimbursements for our FQHCs. And this is what's always pointed to by the right, as they will just pick up these services for women out of this defunded clinics for Planned Parenthood. It is impossible. At the same time that you are cutting Medicaid to these clinics, in Massachusetts alone, that'll be a almost $1.2 billion cut to these health centers, and saying if you're going to pick up what Planned Parenthood provides, you would have to increase the capacity of our FQHCs by 56%. So we're going to take away Medicaid over here, and then we're going to say magically increase capacity by 56% to serve the women who will no longer have a place to get the cancer screenings, the prenatal care, the fertility treatments, contraception, reproductive health care that they need, and that is increasingly difficult to find.
I regret that so much of what is done in this Congress and in this current administration around health care is so politically charged.
Yeah.
And again, going back to the SNAP issue, people are going to see their benefits cut. Again, on average of $2 a person, per meal. That's it. And if states can't meet their cost share, they have no choice but to cut the benefit. And no hearings on this, not one single hearing. And this is a major change, and not even the courtesy of a hearing. We weren't able to bring in governors or anybody from any states to be able to comment on what the impact of this would be, or whether even all the states could meet, their financial obligation. And I mean, that it's part of a reconciliation bill, and that nobody even cares enough to do a hearing on it. Is that the way you legislate around here? I don't know if you want to add anything before I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. I think that's incredibly important, and I just share that the cost-shared discussion really breaks a promise of 50 years of a relationship between the federal government and the states. This is shifting more resources so they can be the bad guys, and so they can reduce benefits, kick people off of eligibility. It's just an existential threat and would result in significant reductions in benefits to the people who need it most.
And I'll just say finally, all this does is it gives my Republican friends some cover to be able to dodge responsibility, and when benefits get cut, say, hey, it's not me, it's the states. And again, that to me is very cynical. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Ms. Fishbach. Thank you. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Thank you. I think we just heard a little bit about myth busting. So, Leader Jeffries, I was wondering if you could address the myth which we have had thrown at us repeatedly throughout all the committee hearings on this bill, that somehow these proposals are going to be paid for by kicking undocumented immigrants off federally subsidized food and health care. Is that true? Are undocumented immigrants getting federal health care and federal food benefits?
Yeah, it's a great question. Under current law, undocumented immigrants are already ineligible for Medicaid, the ACA exchanges, and for SNAP benefits. Not a single undocumented immigrant in this country gets a dime in federal taxpayer dollars for any part of comprehensive Medicaid coverage. Not one. And so when we're talking about nearly 14 million people who are going to be thrown off their health insurance, millions of others who are going to be jammed up by this aggressive cut to SNAP, the largest cut to food assistance in American history, we're talking about American children. We're talking about everyday Americans. We're talking about Americans with disabilities. And when it comes to nutritional assistance, we're talking about veterans who have served this country. sacrificed, risked it all, and they're going to lose access to the food assistance they need to live a life of dignity and respect. Those are the facts. That's why we're fighting hard to stop this GOP tax scam that will hurt everyday Americans dead in its tracks.
I appreciate that because we've heard this gaslighting, for weeks now, and we knew it wasn't true, but I appreciate your clarifying that as well. And of course, to the extent that anyone was trying to game the system and get benefits to which they were not entitled, we have inspectors general who were tasked with rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse, but unfortunately have been fired by this administration. So, don't preach about wanting to ferret out fraud, waste, and abuse when you're pulling the watchdogs whose job it was. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. I've already came to you. Mr. Neguse, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Leader Jeffries, Whip Clark, and Chairman Aguilar for your leadership and for the amendments that you've submitted before the committee today. As you all know, we started at 1 a.m., so this hearing's been going now for about 10 hours. We've heard from many Republican chairmen. We have, of course, many members of our caucus who are here that we'll hear from. The only person, and of course we have all the leadership of the House Democratic Caucus, and we're so grateful that each of you came forward to testify in this fashion. The one person we haven't heard from is the Speaker, who came here briefly earlier but was not willing, I guess, to testify in the way that you all have. Mr. Leader, I know you offered to debate the Speaker on the floor. I believe sent a letter to him about a month and a half ago on this particular reconciliation bill, and I wonder if you might expound a bit on why you think that is important for the American people to be able to hear that debate and that dialogue.
Well, I thank the distinguished gentleman from the great state of Colorado. And first of all, let me thank all of the members of the Rules Committee, certainly my colleagues on the Democratic side who have done a tremendous job on behalf of the American people, Jim McGovern, Mary Gay Scanlon, you, Joe Neguse, and of course, Teresa Leger Fernandez. Let me also thank the chair, Chairwoman Fox from the great state of North Carolina by way of New York City. She may have left the Bronx, but the boogie down Bronx has never left her. So thank you for providing this opportunity for us to have this discussion. But one person is missing, Speaker Mike Johnson. Over a month ago, I asked our distinguished colleague from Louisiana, the Speaker of the House, to debate any of us, but certainly myself, on the House floor about this very bill. He believes it's one big, beautiful bill. We believe it's one big, ugly bill that's going to hurt the American people, hurt children, hurt families, hurt veterans, hurt seniors, cut health care, cut nutritional assistance, explode the debt by a minimum of $3.8 trillion. This is being done by people who claim to be the stewards of fiscal responsibility. $3.8 trillion, if not more. And so the offer still stands. I'd love to have the opportunity to debate Speaker Johnson anytime, any place, right here at the Rules Committee, or certainly on the floor of the House of Representatives. Not a duel, a debate of ideas.
I couldn't agree more, and I thank the leader, the whip, the chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Neguse. Ms. Leger Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to each of you for coming and testifying. Rep. Clark, as you described the impact that the abortion bans have had on states across this country, the lack of reproductive health care in states around this country, and then that this bill would then add to that difficulty. I am reminded, and I've been sharing lately, a story that I didn't used to talk about because it was so hard, about how when I was pregnant, I almost bled to death. And I remember lying on that hospital surgery piece of metal. And they didn't put me to sleep because we were trying to save the baby. And they were screaming, we're going to lose her, we're going to lose her, we're going to lose her. Those doctors could concentrate on saving my life. They did not have to worry about whether they were going to be criminally charged or whether they were going to have to shut down their practice because they were working on a complicated pregnancy. And now we know across the country, in rural areas especially, we are losing our OBGYN care. So I want you to talk a little bit more about what happens in those rural areas, what happens in those areas where doctors are fleeing, and how what they're doing in this bill by going after Planned Parenthood, does that make it worse?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that story. And it is the story of women across this country. Pregnancy is often complicated, and it needs interventions. And we want safe outcomes. The way we get that is good prenatal care and being able to find that within a 50-mile drive from your home. And with the abortion bans, that is becoming out of reach for so many people. And it compounds the cruelty in this bill that is already there in all that they are taking away from women and children and families, from their health care, from food programs, public schools, the list goes on, for this cynical exercise of giving tax cuts to people who are too wealthy to need them or maybe even notice them. So we have to keep our eye focused on what is happening. And with this amendment, it may seem like a sort of insignificant or a very detailed part of this overall package, but the themes are the same. And at the end of the day, it is denial of health care for women in this country. And at the same time, we have a White House lamenting, why aren't women having children? Maybe we'll give them $5,000. If you don't have a safe place to have a child, if you cannot guarantee that you will survive, have the medical attention that you will need, and if you're able to have that child, that child will be able to access health care, that you'll be able to find affordable quality child care near where you go to work, that you will be able to have the fundamentals of a housing to be able to put a life together. A recent study showed the majority of families in this country, 60% of families, cannot afford the basics. And what they're saying in this, and what makes it so pernicious, is this has no place in a reconciliation bill. This is ideology, and this is policy. And this is saying, we don't like abortion providers, and it's not enough to outlaw them in our own states, to deny that care in those states. If there is an affiliate or a subsidiary in any state, then we will shut down the clinic that is not providing abortion care, but is providing this critical primary care for women. That doesn't belong in this bill either, and it is part of the pattern and the theme of this bill, that the American family is put last, and we are making the winner's circle so very small. And it doesn't include women in this country, it doesn't include working families, it doesn't include seniors and veterans, and the 99.9% of people who get up and work hard every single day and want to have a future for their children, a place in this economy, want their small business to survive this tariff regime, want to be able to put a life together that has hope. And instead, we're offering them ideology wrapped up as healthcare, it is a cruelty and it is a shame. And that is why we have seen the Democratic caucus and the American people united against this bill.
Thank you, Rep. Clark. Chairman Aguilar, your amendment, I think, touches on a very important fact, and that is that people are working, and they're working really hard, and they're often not getting paid enough. And when Democrats were in charge, we increased jobs. But right now, there is a recession looming. And what they're going to do is kick people out of Medicaid, and they're not going to be able to get nutrition programs. And they're saying it's because people are lazy. Is that right, Chairman Aguilar? I mean, what is really happening with regards to American families who are working hard and just maybe not making enough money to
Thank you.
afford health care?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for sharing your story, first of all, and for the question. My amendment prevents what I hope is something we can all agree on. No child in our country should go hungry. Yet under this bill, nearly 645,000 people, including children ages 7 to 18, will lose some or all of their SNAP benefit just in my state of California. Whether you're a child in New Mexico or Maine or California, that isn't right. As cruel and failed as that 3-month time limit is, it has never been applied to parents and grandparents with dependent children. It's right in the name, able-bodied adults without dependents. So what is supposed to happen, the child turns 7 and now doesn't need to go to school by themselves, it's just playing wrong, and it puts kids at risk. No one is staying home for SNAP benefits that are $6 per person per day. If my colleagues were serious, we wouldn't be providing child care and transportation and fair wages to help families make ends meet rather than cutting these important benefits.
Thank you, Chair Aguilar. And Leader Jeffries, thank you for painting the picture of what hunger looked like in America and what poverty looked like in America when we decided that that was not an acceptable picture for us. And I think it's a policy choice, but I think you also touched on a sense that it's also a moral choice. And I entered into the record earlier today a letter from 31 faith organizations who were opposing these kinds of cuts because they noted that it was against a principle, a moral principle, that government should provide for those who are in need. And I just wanted to give you the last word. I'm the last Democrat who gets to ask a question on these issues of how you see the values and the choices that are being made in this bill.
Well, thank you again for sharing your powerful story in such a compelling way, and it really does illustrate the challenges that we confront here. When we make policy decisions, we are impacting the American people in ways that in certain cases could be questions of life and death. It's often been said, Dr. King made this observation, that budgets are moral documents. And I don't question anyone's faith in this room. There are people of faith on both sides of the aisle. But we do have to ask the question, can't simply be enough to go to synagogue or go to the mosque or go to church and pray on Sunday and then come to Washington, D.C. and pray on the American people the rest of the week. P-R-E-Y. Pray on the poor, pray on the sick, pray on the afflicted, pray on working families, pray on everyday Americans, pray on our children, pray on our veterans, pray on older Americans, it can't be sufficient to go to church and pray on Sunday, but then come to Washington, D.C., advance a bill like the GOP tax scam, and prey on the American people for the rest of the week. Democrats will never stand for it, and we're going to fight hard to make sure that we do everything we can to uplift the American people, to protect their health care, protect nutritional assistance, protect our veterans, protect our children, protect our women, our families, older Americans, and to protect the American way of life. I yield back.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Whip Clark. Thank you, Chair Aguilar. I will say that, as we did the procession on Palm Sunday, our Archbishop said exactly that he wanted to pray for all of us, that we would remember the poor and the needy, and that we would have the grace in our hearts to do what's right. Tribal leaders came and met with me yesterday and said that they had done the blessings in the morning so that they could bring them to Washington, D.C., because the cuts to Medicaid, the cuts to tribal sovereignty, the cuts was something their people could not survive. And so I think those prayers and those blessings are important so that when we come to Washington, we act from our hearts and that we let that lead our decisions. Thank you very much for all three of you for this incredible amendments, this incredible testimony. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. Mr. Griffith, do you have any questions?
I do not, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. The witnesses are excused.
Thank you.
Madam Chair? Yeah, well,
I'm going to announce the names.
yeah, but before you do, can I make one statement? Please? I want to thank all my colleagues who have been here for an incredibly long time. Some of them have been here since 1 o'clock in the morning. And I feel very proud to be part of this caucus, and I feel very proud of all the members who are here who want to make their voices and their views heard. And I especially want to also thank Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi for being here for hours as well. And I want to thank our leadership team. But it means a lot to me personally, and I think to everybody on this committee, that we have so many colleagues that feel so strongly that they have waited for hours and hours and hours to be able to present their amendments. And I thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me say that.
Okay, the next panel will be Tim Kennedy, Norma Torres, Al Green, Mr. Horsford, Ms. Beatty, Ms. Dingle, Mr. Gomez, and Ms. Robin Kelly.
Oh, yeah, the leader.
If you all would quickly get to the tables, please. We can fit in one more. One more. We can do one more. 2, 4. We got 7. Oh, yeah. May I suggest, if you're here for the next panel, start down here and move up here. It makes it a lot easier to get people seated. Okay. Mr. Kennedy, you're
Thank you,
you're
Chairwoman
recognized
Fox.
for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the committee. I'm here today to offer 2 critical amendments. First, to strike Section 44-111 and preserve the current 10% state cost share for Medicaid expansion, preventing the financial burden that will otherwise fall on states and safety net hospitals. Second, to strike Section 44-126, which targets and defunds community health centers that provide family planning services. Taken together, these provisions in the underlying bill, in addition to the massive cuts to Medicaid that this bill ensures, would decimate access to care for millions of Americans, particularly low-income women, children, and seniors. As members of the majority attempt to shove this bill down the throats of the American people, and frankly, some members of their own party, in a process that started in the middle of the night while America slept, my Democratic colleagues and I are here to stand up and shed light on what you're hoping to hide from the American people. As an occupational therapist myself, the husband of a physical therapist, the son of a nurse, and the representative of a community with 285,000 people who depend on these services, including 110,000 children, let me focus on what's at stake with the Medicaid provisions outlined in this bill. Since the passage of the Affordable Care Act in 2010, nearly 25 million Americans nationwide have gained access to care through the Medicaid expansion. That means moms have access to prenatal and postnatal care, children can get regular checkups, and people struggling to put food on the table can still see a doctor before minor issues become emergencies. It means those in rural areas, often far from major hospitals, can visit clinics, access telehealth services, or get prescriptions filled without having to travel hours for basic preventative care. States that expanded Medicaid saw the uninsured rate among low-income adults decrease by more than half. It is so popular that even in states where the legislature and governor opposed it, like Oklahoma, when put to the voters, it was approved. In New York, the state I represent, expanding Medicaid has given over 1 million people access to care. With this bill, New York will face nearly $1 billion in new costs, while other states could see their expansions repealed entirely. As I've been here since the wee hours of the morning, participating in a broken process that started at 1 a.m., I cannot fathom why members of this majority would choose to rip life-saving care away from your own constituents in the name of tax breaks for billionaires, aside from the fact that the president told you to do so. As an occupational therapist, again, I've worked with patients, young and old, people who rely on Medicaid for necessary care. I've seen what happens when patients delay care because they cannot afford it. Minor conditions become chronic, emergency room wait times lengthen, and hospitals cannot absorb the cost. As a result, our healthcare system becomes destabilized. In cutting Medicaid, we don't eliminate the need for care, we just eliminate access to care. And for those who aren't on Medicaid, we only make care more expensive and harder to get. We force families to choose between medicine and groceries. We push more patients into overcrowded ERs, and we risk lives. This Republican bill does not save money, and it sure doesn't help the people who sent us here to represent them. It shifts the burden to states, to hospitals, and to the people who can least afford it. Simply put, it's cruelty. My amendments protect Medicaid expansion programs and ensure that millions of Americans don't lose the care that they need, and that our public hospitals and safety net systems can continue to function. Without our Democratic amendments, this bill will make all Americans less safe and healthcare less accessible, particularly for our most vulnerable citizens. I urge my colleagues to support these amendments. Healthcare, we know, is not a luxury reserved for the few, and it shouldn't be. It is a right, and it is our responsibility to protect it. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Torres, you're recognized. You're a former member of the committee. We're glad to have you back.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman, Ranking Member McGovern. It's great to be back with all of you here, although under difficult circumstances. I know how difficult it is to have to work through the night, but the work that we're doing here today is really important. It's important for members to be able to share how this bill will impact our constituents. The bill before the committee, it is truly a disaster for the American people. It would throw almost 14 million people off Medicaid. It would cause our hospitals to close in areas that need them the most. It would cut food assistance for more than 3 million Americans, and all to help the multi-billionaires that pay much less in taxes. I fully support many of the amendments proposed by Democrats to fix these cruel actions, and I hope that they'll be made in order. I have 3 amendments that would address problems in the bill and in the current policies of the Trump administration. First, I have submitted an amendment number 507, which would protect the health care of nearly 340,000 of my constituents by striking the hundreds of billions of Medicaid cuts contained in this bill. It's a common sense at this time when families are struggling with higher prices of food and good due to the self-inflicted wound of tariffs caused by our president. Second, I have an amendment to prevent the $300 billion in cuts to food assistance, programs like SNAP. The Republican reconciliation bill would kick more than 3 million people off of food stamp assistance, again, while we are getting imported eggs from Turkey and other countries that are willing to help us in a time of need when our food prices are so high. Third, I have submitted an amendment to lift the SALT deduction cap imposed by the 2017 tax scam bill. The reality is that this simply shifts more federal taxes to Californians when California already contributes much more than many of your states. For example, California is a donor state. We send $692 billion to the federal government, and we receive back $609. That means we send $83 billion to many of your states to help fund the quality of life that all of you enjoy. Representative Griffin, Virginia they pay $107 billion. They receive more than in federal government that they give. Chip Roy of Texas gets back $71 billion more. Chairwoman Fox, North Carolina gets $53 billion more. Representative Norman of South Carolina, you receive $35 billion more. Representative Austin Scott of Georgia and Brian Jack of Georgia receives $35 billion more. And Representative Hutching of Indiana receives $30 billion more. So if we want to talk about welfare and welfare to the very poor, let's start with your states. Maybe your states should pay their fair share. Lastly, I have an amendment that would help stop the unlawful and dangerous firings of Federal Aviation Administration workers who maintain our air traffic control systems. They are the backbone of the air traffic control system. They are the unseen workers that help keep planes in the air and provide safe landings when we land. They support our air traffic controllers that ensure a safe flying public. While the administration is trying to recruit more air traffic controllers, they continue to fire probationary employees and reduce staffing for the people who maintain these systems. This is something that is critical that we need to address. Next and lastly, I have an amendment that would strike the 5% federal tax on remittance transfers in this bill. the tax proposal in this bill would disproportionately impact immigrant workers who already pay into a system that they cannot reclaim any of the Social Security or taxes, state, local taxes that they pay into. I'm sorry, lastly, I have an amendment that would disapprove of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers work plan for fiscal year 2025. This plan isn't just flawed, it blatantly politicizes the project selection process in attempts to leave, once again, California, the state that all of you depend for welfare for your constituents, to have 0 projects allocated by them. I think the American people should know what is in this bill. It's a tax giveaway to the filthy rich. Thank you, Chairwoman, for your patience, and I yield back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. Mr. Green, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ranking Member, members all, I am here today because of SNAP and a concern. But first, I'd like to thank Ms. Mang, Grace Mang, for introducing the Fairness for Victims of SNAP Skimming Act. It has been reduced to Amendment number 30. I had a similar piece of legislation, and this whole issue was called to my attention by a news reporter from Channel 2 KPRC in Houston, Texas. And as a result of his engagement, we produced a piece of legislation. I do not want to see block grants to Texas for health care. Madam Chair, Texas refused $100 billion to expand Medicaid. This is one of the reasons why Texas has the highest percentage of uninsured persons and the highest number of uninsured persons in the United States of America. I don't know that Texas is going to be responsible enough to accept the grants. What will you do and what will we do when Texas does what it does quite regularly, and that is decline federal dollars? So I'm here today to talk about a program that has benefited not only Texans, but persons across the length and breadth of the country. And this has been a bipartisan effort in the past. It was in existence until December of last year, right around Christmas. And it has to do with reimbursing persons who have their SNAP monies skimmed away with electronic devices such that they have to sometimes go without food. They are victims. We should not allow the criminals.
Al, would you suspend for just a minute? There's a knocking noise going on somewhere. Do you all hear that? And it's bothering everybody out there because I can see it on your faces. I don't know where it's coming from. It stopped. All right. Okay. It stopped, so I don't know what's causing it, but it was hard, making it hard to hear you and understand you. So I want to make sure we can hear you, and it's also distracting. So we'll start again. You didn't lose any time.
Thank you. I will elevate the level of my voice.
Okay, if you would speak up a little bit.
Thank you, I shall.
Thank you.
As I was indicating, this has been bipartisan. It has prevented criminals from causing persons to lose food. And I think that it should be bipartisan now in terms of reinstating this program such that people who need food and cannot afford the necessity of life will be able to acquire the food that they merit. I would also add this, that this program is one that has been sponsored by Republicans. So Republicans and Democrats should be able to agree to prevent criminals from taking food. Finally, this. There's been talk about work and how work is good, and I agree, work brings dignity. But the thing, Madam Chair, that hit a nerve with me was when our dear brother, whose name I cannot call because it's not appropriate to do so, but if I could call Mr. Norman's name, I would. This dear brother said that work built America, and he's right. It did. Over 10 million people working for more than 240 years without a paycheck. America is a great country, and it's great, Madam Chair, because of the economic foundational mothers and fathers whose lives were sacrificed. If you're in this country, you're standing on the backs of those persons who were enslaved. And you're right, work ought to be recognized. In this country, in our capital, in Emancipation Hall, the recognition for 240 years of enslavement is a plaque not much larger than that picture on the wall. That's an emancipation. It would seem to me that if we truly appreciate the dignity in work, then we would express that dignity for the people who had a hand in building the White House, a hand in building the Capitol, built the roads, the bridges, planted the seeds, harvested the crops, fed the nation. Why don't we recognize them to the same extent that we recognize people who are victims of the Holocaust? It just seems to me that if we're going to talk about work, let's talk about the people who built the country. And finally, I want to thank you for the time, and I'd like to thank the ranking member as well, and would hope that we can save this SNAP program. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, to the ranking member, to the Assistant Democratic Leader, to the members of the committee. I've been with you since 3 o'clock this morning. I want to thank you for your time, but I'm here to bring the voices of 750,000 people in Nevada who elected me to do a job, and that's to make sure their perspective is heard by this Congress and this committee. I know we've heard a lot, but I want to touch on what this bad-built bill for billionaires doesn't do, because it barely touches housing, a crisis that is affecting more than just the people in my district. My disappointment is with what is not in here. So once again, like I did in the Ways and Means Committee, I am here to let you and the American people know that there's nothing to address the fact that rent increases are outpacing people's income, that there's nothing in this bill that builds out housing for the middle class, that there's nothing in this bill that touches Trump's blanket tariffs, which are taxes that Americans pay, not some foreign governments, that will raise the cost of housing. In fact, in 2018, the CBO projected that the initial Trump tax cuts would reduce residential investment since their provisions are not favorable towards housing. That report proved true, as inflation-adjusted residential investment today is nowhere close to its pre-2018 trend. I'll also tell you what this bill does have. It has an annual tax cut for billionaires, over $255,000 a year, while the average benefit for working people earning less than $50,000 annually is a meager $265. The cutting of health care for 14 million Americans, and the selling of Nevada public lands without a single dollar going to the state for which those lands are intended. So let's recap. Trump is making borrowing more expensive. He's raising the cost of housing materials due to tariffs, and extending the GOP tax scam means continued reductions in residential investment and making Nevadans pay for it with our land. Please make it make sense. That's why I am offering a package of amendments to help our veterans, to address tipped workers, small businesses, and the hospitality sector, which has been hit hard by President Trump's tariffs. However, for the purposes of this hearing, I will focus my remarks around helping our veterans. My amendment seeks to address the housing crisis that my colleagues seem to be ignoring. This amendment would create a Veterans Housing Fund through a 1% surtax on excessive corporate stock buybacks, limited to firms with over $10 billion in assets. We are asking that the largest companies who recorded nearly $1 trillion in buybacks pay 1%. Over 30,000 veterans are experiencing homelessness. If my colleagues are committed to helping veterans, then you can support this amendment to help balance that equation. This is not a blue city amendment. According to HUD's 2024 Annual Homelessness Assessment Report, nearly half of veterans experiencing homelessness are in suburban or rural communities. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in this committee represent 8 states that total around 6,000 veterans who are experiencing homelessness. Georgia, nearly 650. Virginia, around 400. New York, almost 1,200. Indiana, over 400. Texas, nearly 1,850. South Carolina, almost 400. Minnesota, 300. And North Carolina, nearly 700 veterans experiencing homelessness. There is nothing in this bill that addresses shelter, mental health, substance abuse, job training, and other assistance specifically for our veterans. So I'm urging my Republican colleagues to work with us now to fix this bill before it goes to the floor. We want to work with you to address the problems facing our constituents. Earlier this month, I introduced 3 bills that can help address the housing crisis. We need legislation that addresses the corporate takeover of single-family homes, like my HOME Act. Not one Republican joined when I brought that bill forward. I introduced my Unlock Housing Act to address affordable housing by allowing the Bureau of Land Management to be able to lease the land to local governments and tribes specifically for affordable housing. This is a smart method to use the laws that already exist to build out more housing. Why? Because as Nevadans know, the land that we sell has not helped create the housing that we need. But we are seeing the same story over and over, that this bill does not have working people in mind. Instead, we have people like Representative Mark Amodei pushing to sell off more than 500,000 acres of land in Nevada under the guise of creating more affordable housing. He didn't even give a second thought to selling out our community. And for what? To use Nevada as a cash grab for the nation's debt? Don't believe me? Look at Section 8315 of the bill. If my colleagues are truly serious about addressing the struggles of the middle class and specifically housing affordability, then please support my amendments. I'm also putting on the record that I've sent a letter to Chairman Smith and to Speaker Johnson to bring up my TIPS Act to ensure that tip workers receive the benefits that they are entitled. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the Rules Committee. I urge you to make in order my amendment, amendment number 280. This amendment is simple. It would stop the implementation of the Reconciliations Bill's massive cuts for the wealthy if the bill's other provisions result in reduction in funding of Medicaid, Social Security, or SNAP. Let me just put it in simple terms. It says no tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans if you cut the programs that everyday Americans, families, seniors, and others rely on. If you believe that is true, then you should have no problem supporting my amendment, which would make no changes if the bill does not cut Medicaid or food assistance. We are here to serve our constituents, and I know I'm not the only one here who has received thousands of letters and calls demanding that Congress protect health care, food assistance, and other critical programs. Constituents are saying, what are we doing? Well, I'm telling you, this panel shows you what Democrats are doing. We are fighting. And despite what the title of the Republican Budget Reconciliation Bill would have you believe, it is not one big, beautiful bill. It's a big billionaire's bankroll bill. And it is one of the biggest and most reckless and heartless attack on American families. It would rip away health care from almost 14 million Americans and 11 million children with food assistance. And the worst part of it is none of this is necessary. It is only being done to bankroll a billionaire's tax cut. That is why I am offering this amendment. I am offering this amendment for the 2.4 million Ohioans who rely on Medicaid to access critical health care services like blood pressure, diabetes screenings, mammograms, mental health services, and other life care situations. I am offering this amendment for the millions of women across the country who rely on Medicaid to cover birth of their child and to keep them and their babies healthy before and after birth. I am offering this amendment for the more than 42 Americans without federal food assistance that they might not eat tomorrow. I am offering this amendment for Anisha, an Ohioan, a constituent mother of two, and a recent cancer survivor who relies on Medicaid. She's scheduled for surgery that Medicaid makes affordable. Her family also depends on SNAP to put healthy food on the table. Losing these benefits would be devastating. In short, I'm offering this amendment for Americans who are struggling to get by, who are counting on us, Democrats and Republicans, to lower their costs and to improve their lives, not enrich billionaires. Unfortunately, families I'm fighting for will not benefit from the tax cuts in this package. The top 0.1% of earners, billionaires, will see a tax break of some $278,000 per year. And that is a tax break of $762 per day, almost twice the weekly salary of someone making minimum wage in Ohio. It is clear that this bill is an attempt to sell out hardworking American families who are just trying to make ends meet to benefit the few. This bill would harm our constituents, Democrats' constituents, Republicans' constituents. Republicans have claimed that this bill does not cut benefits. And if you believe that is true, you should have no problem supporting my amendment, which would make no changes if the bill does not cut Medicaid and food assistance. So I would urge you to make this in order. And Madam Chair, I would like to enter into the records the GOP's budget plan, this article, the GOP's budget plan that makes it hard to conceal its lies about Medicaid and SNAP.
Without objection.
Thank you. Lastly, let me just say to the American people, we have been here all night, and we're here because of you. They planned this hearing at 1 a.m. in the morning to 5, and here we are now in the first panel at 11:45. Is this the way our country should run? Is this what you expect from our leaders? Let me answer it for you. The answer is no. And that's why we are here today. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member McGovern, for letting us testify today about issues that matter to all of us and to the American people. Over the past several weeks, I've been very concerned about what this Republican reconciliation bill will do. Not only does this bill, the bill, if it's enacted, the House bill, would be the biggest loss of health care coverage in American history that will strip health care from almost 14 million Americans. But as my colleague just said, how many of the pieces of this legislation have been considered in the dark of night when the American people are not able to watch what is happening? It's been too many pieces of this legislation. I have offered several amendments Medicaid is the largest payer of long-term care in America, which is why I filed an amendment to ensure Medicaid home and community-based services, or HCBS, are not cut or reduced as a result of this reconciliation bill. We know that the majority of seniors and individuals with disabilities would prefer to receive care in the comfort of their homes, in the communities that they've known, where they can maintain an independent life, remain engaged in their communities, and aged with dignity. And in fact, it is less expensive than in nursing homes, which is where most long-term care in America is paid for by Medicaid. Yet hundreds of thousands of Americans are already sitting on state wait lists to access home-based care, and this bill will exacerbate this issue. No one should have to sit for years on a waiting list to get the care that they deserve, and caregivers shouldn't live in poverty to do this critical work. Let's be honest. The long-term care health system in this country is broken. And until someone you've loved or you yourself are in it, you don't know how bad it is. And this system, this bill is going to break the system even more. I pray, I'm asking that my Republican colleagues change course on this misguided bill that would harm seniors and individuals living with disabilities. I'm also strongly supportive, and I'm a co-sponsor of Representative Riley's amendment regarding President Trump's most favored nation executive order that was issued May 12th. In fact, I offered this exact amendment during the Energy and Commerce Committee markup last week. This amendment supports President Trump's executive order that aims to lower medication costs for Americans by preventing pharmaceutical manufacturers from charging Americans higher prices while giving discounts to other nations, when we, in fact, pay 2, 3, 4, 10 times as much as other countries do and spend more on the research for these drugs than any other country in the world. No one in America should have to pay higher prices for medications than patients in other countries, which I have to admit to you, was shocked that every single Republican on the Energy and Commerce Committee voted against this amendment that supports their own president's prescription drug pricing plan. And I have to say, I was very surprised after being up for all night when I watched President Trump Wednesday night say this provision was going to be in this bill. So I think there's some communication issues too. Simply doesn't make sense. This logic is backwards and, quite frankly, absurd. And on top of this, we had a bipartisan deal that opened the door for a solution to lower drug costs for Americans last Congress. But thanks to Elon Musk, Republicans tanked that agreement and are now trying to pass a bill with no meaningful change that would not only fail to lower drug costs, but would also rip coverage away from 14 million Americans. I'm going to end by expressing my concerns with this legislation's impact on our environment and natural resources, which is why I filed 3 amendments that I offered during the natural resources markup 2 weeks ago. Taken together, these amendments would preserve judicial review. I think too many people forget we are a system of checks and balances in this democracy. Protect compliance with the Endangered Species Act, which has literally saved thousands of species, and prevent the Inflation Reduction Act decisions from NOAA from applying to fisheries, climate resilience, and harmful algae bloom forecasted in the Great Lakes. I'm getting that look, so thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. She yields back, and I recognize Mr. Gomez of California for 5 minutes.
Republicans are playing Russian roulette with the American people. That's right, I said it, Russian roulette. And that's because either you're going to lose your health care, that could probably save your life, or not. You can get a tax increase or not. This is serious business. According to the Joint Committee on Taxation, Congress's nonpartisan scorekeeper says families making $30,000 or less will pay an average of $200 billion more in taxes because of this bill. Families making $50,000 a year, you have a 50-50 chance of seeing a real change in your taxes. But you'll have to wait till April to see how lucky you were. Now the billionaire establishment has nothing to worry about. They'll get a tax cut of $270,000 a year. Right here in this committee, the American people are witnessing one of the biggest transfers of wealth in American history. But Republicans are advancing legislation that will slash billions of dollars from Medicaid, health care for the working class, so that they can give trillions in tax breaks to the billionaires, ultra-wealthy, and the largest corporations in this country. Republicans are literally stealing from the poor to give to the rich, all while adding trillions in deficit spending and to the debt. They should be ashamed about this legislation. Because look at, it's not what's happening in my district, look at what's happening in their districts. In North Carolina, 400,000 people will lose Medicaid coverage. In Minnesota, 250,000 will lose the health care. Texas, 380,000. Virginia, 390,000. New York, 1.2 million. These aren't numbers, these are real people who will lose health care coverage. And if they don't have coverage, they might not have insulin, they might not have preventative care, they might have to go into the hospital to see an emergency doctor later, which can cost them their lives. We also know that 51% of new moms and their babies who are covered by Medicaid will lose. The seniors that don't get enough coverage through Medicare will lose. The sons or daughters that don't earn enough to cover their parents' assisted living facility will lose. People that live in rural communities that are mostly represented by Republicans will lose. Republicans are making it harder for working people to get by, harder for families to welcome a new child, get postpartum care, or cover basic medical needs during one of the most vulnerable times in their lives. Families are barely staying afloat. Many who are working 2 or more jobs just to get by, and they're already stretched thin by the cost of food, housing, and childcare. Now that Trump's tariffs are hitting them with an extra $4,900 a year. And Republicans always say that they're the pro-family party, but they never do actually anything that actually values the American family. And Republicans say they're the balanced budget party, but this bill balloons the deficit and saddles future generations with more debt that they have to pay off. Voters sent us here to lower costs and create real opportunities, and that's what we should be delivering on. We should make the child tax credit fully refundable and advanceable and make it bigger and pay it monthly. We should build millions of starter homes for new families and help them buy their first home so that they can build wealth. We should make child care affordable and guaranteed paid family leave. But this bill does none of that. That's because Republicans choose the billionaire establishment that has taken root in D.C. over their own constituents. Now I ask the same question to my Republican colleagues as I asked in the Ways and Means. I want to ask you here, and they answered wrong. So I'm asking you guys, are you for the working man or woman who is struggling to get by, or the billionaires? Are you for the babies or the billionaires? Are you for the seniors or the billionaires? Are you for the American family or the billionaires? I have introduced 14 amendments making sure that billionaires pay their fair share to housing, to health care, and one of those bills is sponsored by Speaker Emerita, that is extend the ACA premium tax credit to help pregnant women and children. That's one of the things that we know, that in some of the states that are going to have the biggest cuts to Medicaid also are some of these southern states that have the highest maternal mortality rate in the country. You know, California has its problems, but we actually have one of the lowest maternal mortality rates in this country, the lowest. So here's the thing. Once again, are you for pregnant women or the billionaires? Are you for babies or billionaires? Because that's what this all comes down to. And I will ask that if you vote on just one amendment, maybe you can restore a little faith in this kid from California. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Ms. Kelly of Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member. I have an amendment at the desk titled Amendment Number 371. My amendment is simple and requires 12 months of continuous Medicaid and CHIP coverage of full benefits for pregnant and postpartum women. We've heard a lot about that. I've dedicated 10 years to this topic. This amendment will codify what we already know is essential, that 1 year of postpartum care is not just medically necessary, it is a matter of life and death. Let's remember that the United States maternal death rate remains far higher than other high-income countries, and nearly 2 out of 3 maternal deaths occur during the postpartum period. Our nation is facing a maternal health crisis, and it has been for years. It's shameful, and it has worsened. The maternal mortality and morbidity epidemic is particularly dangerous for people with disabilities who face a maternal death rate that is 11 times higher than the rate for non-disabled people. Black women are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. And American Indian and Alaska Native women are twice as likely to die of complications. Medicaid improves maternal health outcomes and ensures access to vital pregnancy services. Medicaid covers almost half of all births in this country, and in many states it's more than that. And it covers more than half of all births in rural communities. Consider a new mom from Arkansas who was finally approved for Medicaid in her 3rd trimester following a delay in her eligibility determination. Her Medicaid coverage was invaluable during complicated labor and delivery. Her baby was not receiving enough oxygen, and she ultimately needed an unplanned cesarean section. Without Medicaid, that procedure would have resulted in profound medical debt, giving the cost of a C-section in Arkansas is estimated to be close to $10,000 without insurance. Ensuring 12-month coverage can give women the peace of mind that they have stable coverage and access. Cutting funding means cutting care for moms and babies during their most vulnerable time. That means fewer prenatal checkups, more life-saving deliveries, and forcing states to choose between vital programs. Waivers aren't enough, especially during major budget cuts like those in this bill. In Michigan, 12-month postpartum Medicaid coverage reached nearly 45,000 moms, reducing maternal deaths from 36 to 22 per 100,000 births in a year. Most maternal deaths occur after childbirth. 1 in 3 happens 1 week and 1 year postpartum, between 1 week and 1 year postpartum. In Colorado, 89% of maternal deaths were preventable. Continuous guaranteed year-long coverage saved lives. Overall, over 80% of maternal deaths are preventable. This amendment codifies 12 months of full Medicaid and CHIP benefits to postpartum individuals, no more state-by-state patchwork, no more expiration dates on care, no more new mothers being dropped from coverage just 60 days after giving birth, right when they're still at high risk for complications like infection, postpartum depression, and more. Postpartum coverage for 12 months should be mandatory and permanent and immune from shifting state politics and budget pressures. We cannot expect someone to recover from childbirth, return to work, care for a newborn while also scrambling to reapply for coverage. That's not health care. It's chaos and disproportionately harms low-income families, rural communities, and communities of color. We've already seen the impact of this policy. Thanks to the American Rescue Plan, Democrats enabled states to extend postpartum coverage to 12 months, and 49 states have done so. In just 4 years, red and blue states alike chose to prioritize maternal and child health. But making it optional isn't enough. With the deep cuts proposed in this bill, states will soon face painful budget choices that could jeopardize this progress. To protect moms and babies everywhere, we must make this coverage permanent, mandatory, and nationwide. This is about saving lives, supporting families, and finally treating maternal health as a national priority it should be. I have deep concerns states will roll back care for pregnant and postpartum women. My amendment ensures that all women in the United States, regardless of where they live, can access comprehensive health care for a full year following the birth of a child to survive and thrive. I've spoken to doctors, nurses, midwives, doulas, and this is what all of them recommend. If Republicans claim, quote unquote, they want to strengthen Medicaid for mothers, as they asserted in their press releases, then this should be a no-brainer and something that we all can support. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and help us build a stronger, safer future for all moms and families so that people are not being shut out from coverage because we have made it too complicated for them. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Do I have anyone on the Republican side that wishes to ask questions? Seeing none, recognize the gentleman, Mr. McGovern.
Well, thank you. I just a couple of observations. First of all, I want to again thank you all for your commitment and your stamina and for being here. Again, I appreciate the fact that many of you waited many, many hours to be able to testify, but I think that's a reflection of how strongly you feel about the issues that you brought before this committee. And I certainly, I think I speak for all the Democrats here, we all support your amendments, and we'll do our best to try to see what we can do to make them in order. But I also, when I was listening to everybody here, I couldn't help but think about what could have been. You know, again, as I said before, I mean, there are things in the tax bill that I think we all could agree on. You know, the middle-class tax cuts, the no tax on tips, and child tax credit, all that stuff. We could have come together and agreed on that. And I think that, you know, we would have, you know, if Republicans wanted our vote, we could have negotiated a better deal on the SNAP benefits, which, you know, right now is unacceptable, and certainly insisted that people don't get thrown off health care. But I think you could have gotten a bipartisan bill. Maybe not every Democrat and not every Republican, but you could have gotten a bipartisan bill that might have been able to make its way to the president's desk that reflected our values, that also reflected some of the Republican values, but didn't go after the most vulnerable people in this country. But I think what's happened here in this House right now is that the way the current leadership thinks of legislating is that whatever the most extreme element of their conference wants, that's the direction. And so there's no desire, there's no attempt to try to bring Democrats into the process. I'm reading, you know, breaking news. Speaker Johnson and House Freedom Caucus will go to White House today to meet with President Trump. Trump is expected to tell the House Freedom Caucus that the bill needs to pass today. I don't even know, you know, he was up here yesterday morning. I don't know, you know, maybe this will make a difference. But it doesn't sound like, if that's the strategy, that this bill is going to moderate. And I think that's bad for the country. This is a big deal. The implications of this Reconciliation Act on every aspect that was raised by all of you today is significant. It is going to adversely impact, it is going to hurt our constituents, as well as the constituents of our Republican colleagues. There is no doubt about that. And so again, I want to again thank you for being here, and again, I support all your amendments, and for what it's worth, and I think I speak for all of us up here, it's kind of inspiring for us to see you just kind of wait it out, because you know what the stakes are. And I think people who are tuning in also appreciate your being here today. So I thank you, and I yield back to the chairman.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize Ms. Scanlon for.
Thank you. I want to echo the ranking member's remarks. I think the outpouring of members here is inspirational and is a measure of just how significant and impactful this bill is going to be in a negative way. And you've all raised important policy issues that deserve full legislative consideration. And also, the American people deserve to know where their representatives stand on these issues. So I would support a full vote on them. I did with respect to Representative Kelly's bill. This has been a major issue in my district, and I just wanted, in support of that bill, to seek unanimous consent to enter a Philadelphia Inquirer article from September 21st, 2022, entitled 80% of pregnancy-related deaths are preventable, CDC says, highlighting a problem in Philadelphia.
Without objection, so ordered.
Yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize Mr. Neguse for his 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Well, first, let me just say thank you to my colleagues and echo the sentiments from our ranking member and Ms. Scanlon, our deep appreciation. And it's not lost on us that there are several of our colleagues here, Mr. Chairman, who testified just a few short minutes ago, who've spent more time in this hearing than Republican colleagues of ours on this committee. There are several members. No, I'm not referencing the chairman, but others of your colleagues. Mr. Horsford has been here literally since we arrived and convened, and you have members who, as has Mr. Kennedy, I'll go down the whole list, but every member here has been here for literally going on 7, 8, 9, 10 hours for 5 minutes, to be able to speak for 5 minutes on behalf of the people that they represent. And I think that's a testament to their convictions and their passions for their constituencies. I want to ask just a few questions of Mr. Horsford and Mr. Gomez as the two members who serve on Ways and Means. Mr. Horsford, you heard me earlier, if you might, maybe at 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning, I don't remember exactly when, in my exchange with the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee regarding the tax on tips. And I'm still trying to understand why the Republicans on the committee don't just put your bill on the floor, given that there's bipartisan support for it, given that this seems to be an issue that they're passionate about. I struggle to understand why that's not the case. And I know you have fought vigorously on behalf of the people that you represent in Nevada for that particular policy, but I want to give you an opportunity to expound upon it if you're interested.
Thank you to the Assistant Democratic Leader. Look, to be clear, I've been working with a coalition of workers, the culinary workers, Unite Here, One Fair Wage, and others to bring legislation to provide relief to tip workers. 6 million tip workers in America today make as little as $2.13 an hour. $2.13. 70% of those workers are women, and women of color in particular. So on top of giving relief and allowing more tip workers to keep their hard-earned money by eliminating the tax on tips, we also need to give workers a raise. And that is what my bill does. No other bill does that. My bill also has important safeguards so that people continue to pay into Social Security, so that hedge funds are not able to grift off of the policy, so that we define what a tip worker is, so that it's not abused under our tax law. And so for Chairman Smith to sit here today and say, you know, he couldn't bring a bill to the committee is just wrong, because I'm ready. I've been ready, and my bill has been ready since the beginning of this Congress. And it comes from the actual tip workers who are affected by the policy. I am a co-sponsor of the bill that was unanimously passed by the Senate, the same version. And I see no reason why the House cannot bring up a standalone bill to make sure that we are advocating for the needs of tip workers and all workers. You're going to have all these compounding effects of cutting health care, of cutting nutrition programs, of making it harder for working families to get by. Then let's give workers a raise. Let's give them a raise that's livable enough to actually pay the rent on and to afford to buy a home. That is what Democrats stand for. That's what we're fighting for, is to give everyone an opportunity to not just survive, but to actually thrive in America. So thank you to the Assistant Leader for the opportunity to talk about that legislation. And Chairman Smith, wherever you are, my letter to you asking for a standalone vote on my legislation is at your office.
Well said. Well said. Mr. Gomez, there was a robust discussion earlier about the tax brackets.
Yeah.
And I think the chairman was not as candid as I would have hoped with respect to his description of the various tax brackets in the reconciliation bill. I wonder if you might talk about the billionaire tax bracket and the amendment that you proposed.
Yeah, first, I have an amendment that would increase taxes on billionaires, basically preventing them from getting any kind of tax break in this bill and actually require them to pay their fair share, increasing the tax bracket from 36% to 39%, roughly. So in this room, by show of hands, who believes a billionaire shouldn't get a tax break and actually should pay their fair share of taxes? Like, All right? How about on the Republicans? You guys can help me restore my faith. Because here's the thing.
There aren't many Republicans here on
Okay,
the committee,
but
unfortunately.
here's
They're
the
not-
thing.
They've all left, but.
And the reason why is that if you increase the taxes on the billionaires, you can actually give the people who are getting screwed at the bottom rungs of the economic ladder a tax break. So for the record, I want to enter into the record the distribution chart, distribution of the estimated revenue effects of the tax provisions of the chairman's markup, basically what's going to happen into the record. This is by the Joint Committee on Taxation. It's an official record.
What's it on?
It basically shows how much, who's paying what in taxes under this bill by the Joint Committee on Taxation.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. And here's the thing, the reason why, let's go over years. Calendar year 2027, if you're, people that make less than $15,000 a year will pay an additional $1 billion in taxes. $1 billion. And here's the thing, in the year 2029, people that are making less than 15 million are going to pay 15,000 will pay another $2.6 billion in taxes that year. People that are making 15 to 30,000, 2.5 billion in additional taxes that year. And we go on to year 2031. They're actually less than 15,000. They're going to pay another $3.6 billion that tax year. 3.6 billion. And if you're making 15 to 30,000, you're going to be, all those people will be ponying up another $4.5 billion. $4.5 billion. And by the year 2033, let people that are in that tax bracket of less than 15,000, $3.7 billion just that year. And then the people making 15 to 30,000, $3.8 billion. So anybody that says that the people at those low rungs of the economic ladder are not getting screwed or not going to be paying more in taxes are just absolutely wrong. And with that, I yield back to Mr. Neguse.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. I yield back now.
I did.
Gentleman yields back. Seeing anyone else seeing no one else wishing to ask questions, I thank this group for presenting your amendments. Thank you for being with us, and we will move on to the next group, and I'll need the names. All right, as they're leaving, our next panel will be Ms. Dexter, Mr. Carter, Ms. Takuda, Ms. Bonamici, Ms. Barragan, Mr. Tonko, Ms. Goodlander, and Ms. Stansberry. All right, if Ms. McLean Delaney could join as well. And now recognize Ms. Dexter of Oregon for her 5 minutes presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our ranking member. Today, I'm offering 3 amendments rooted in a basic principle. Government should work for the people, not silence them, not shield corruption, and certainly not rip away healthcare. Let's start with what this GOP tax scam tries to take from the public, their voice. Under current law, communities can protest oil and gas leasing decisions that threaten their land, water, or climate. This bill would impose a $150 fee, plus more for extra pages or lease parcels, just to be heard. And let's be honest about what that is. A tax on public participation, a toll on free speech. And it won't deter billion-dollar oil companies. It will deter working people, people who love outdoor places. At the same time, Republicans are slashing royalty payments and handing billions in giveaway to the fossil fuel industry. That tells you everything you need to know about where their priorities lie. My amendment would strike this unjust protest fee from the bill and protect the public's right to be heard. Second, we must ensure accountability. I'm offering an amendment to allocate a modest 0.5% of new funds to the Department of Interior's Office of the Inspector General, a nonpartisan watchdog that saves taxpayers money by rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. This should be easy for Republicans to support. It's the same bipartisan provision they themselves championed by our current House Natural Resources Chair in 2021. It's simple. Let's ensure transparency and pass this amendment. And now I want to speak to what I believe is the most urgent and dangerous part of this legislation, its impact on healthcare. Before I came to Congress, I spent nearly 20 years caring for some of the sickest patients in our community. I've worked in emergency rooms. I know what happens when a system doesn't have the resources that it needs to serve its patients. That's why I'm offering an amendment to require states to report on how coverage losses under this bill would impact uncompensated care and emergency department wait times in safety net hospitals. If this bill were really only about ridding out waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid, we should welcome this kind of data. But we know the truth. This bill isn't about waste. It's about ripping healthcare away from nearly 14 million Americans and destabilizing the healthcare system for everyone else in the process. And for what? To give tax breaks to billionaires. Medicaid isn't just a lifeline for patients, it's a fundamental part of our healthcare infrastructure. Providers depend on it to stay open, to serve not only Medicaid patients, but you, me, everyone in our communities. Cutting Medicaid will mean clinics and hospitals in rural towns will shut down. Hospitals in cities will be over capacity. Seniors will be forced out of nursing facilities due to closures. And emergency rooms will go on divert, turning away people in crisis because there simply isn't enough space for people to be seen. We're talking about longer wait times for pediatric care, delays for life-saving cancer treatment, people suffering and dying, not because we don't have the tools to help them, but because we've made a political choice to take those tools away. These cuts will be devastating, and the consequences won't be statistics on a spreadsheet. They will be lives lost, futures cut short, and suffering that could have been prevented. And again, for what? Tax breaks for billionaires. I urge my Republican colleagues, show courage in this moment. Stand with the constituents who cannot afford to lose their voice and their health care. Support these amendments and defeat this outrageous and dangerous bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Louisiana for 5 minutes, Mr. Carter.
Well, okay. Okay. Let's start again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, the ranking member. My first amendment, number 299, preserves environmental justice block grants for that improve public health. The EPA has provided grants for more than 50 years that protect our constituents' public health and enhance their environment. This is especially true for the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grant Program, which provides valuable funding that serves community centers, environmental rehabilitation projects, and public health revitalization initiatives that would otherwise not be possible. These projects are providing environmental and public health benefits in Democratic and Republican districts alike. However, this bipartisan bill ruthlessly claws back these funds and eliminates this vital program. Not only is this bill stealing people's health care, it's also making them sicker. My amendment will ensure that environmental and climate justice block grant projects that improve the health outcomes in low-income communities do not lose critical funding. If Republicans truly prioritize their constituents, they should easily agree with me that this funding is valuable and must be protected. My second amendment is amendment number 358, which would add to the text the bipartisan Next Generation 911 Act to the Republican budget reconciliation legislation before us today and fully fund programs using the proceeds from future spectrum auctions. Because of technology advances, the telecommunications from the past 50 years, Americans can communicate today in ways weren't even contemplated when 911 system was first created. Yet, our 911 systems are stuck in the past. Our first responders are unable to utilize these tools we take for granted in this digital age. We are far behind. Police officers, firefighters, and emergency medical technicians who serve communities we represent deserve better. I cannot think of a better use of dollars raised from auctioning off public airwaves than to upgrade old, outdated public safety communication systems. I hope my colleagues will vote yes on this amendment to modernize our 911 systems for the 21st century. Congress should give FCC the authority to begin spectrum auctions now. Those proceeds need to help our constituents and first responders not pay for tax cuts for the ultra-rich. My third amendment is Amendment 373, which states no funds can be used to effectuate the detention or removal of United States, of citizens of the United States or any non-citizen whose legal status was determined or visa revoked due to exercising simply their right to speech, free speech, not breaking any laws, simply their right to free speech. Last month, I led a delegation of House and Senate members to 2 ICE processing centers in Louisiana to meet with individuals who had their legal status revoked and remain in immigration detention simply because they exercised their right to free speech. If these individuals can be jailed for exercising their First Amendment rights, any person in this country is under the same threat. Now, let me be clear. I do not support any hate speech of any kind. Speech that supports anti-Semitism or calls for violence, I am totally opposed to. The individuals we met with were very clear. They don't support these matters either. My fourth amendment and last amendment is number 357, which states that 100% of Medicaid cuts resulting from waste, fraud, and abuse will go directly back into programs to strengthen Medicaid for generations to come. My Republican friends say that they want to help the people that Medicaid was, quote unquote, intended for, the most vulnerable. And to that I say, put your money where your mouth is. But we all know they won't. It's always been about enriching billionaires while ripping health care away from seniors, children, mothers, and those with disabilities. Republicans now say that Medicaid, shameful. We will put the most vulnerable at risk. That's why we keep spinning false narratives about waste, fraud, and abuse. But don't take my word for it. Take it from Republican Senator Josh Hawley, and I quote, "Will Republicans be the majority of the people or a permanent minority speaking only for C-suite?" So If the goal is to protect Medicaid and root out waste, fraud, and abuse, we should have no opposition to support my amendment to reinvesting these funds into Medicaid. I have one final quote, ma'am, and I know I'm shortly over, but I want to remind people. I'm told yesterday that our president, Donald Trump, said, and I quote, please forgive my language, "Don't fuck with Medicaid." I hope he was serious, and I hope this committee takes it serious too. I yield.
Carter, Mr. Kuda, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member McGovern, I submit one amendment today, 159, protecting rural Americans from SNAP cuts. Every day, millions of Americans go to bed hungry. For 14 straight years, the United States has led the developed world in food insecurity. In 2023, over 1 in 4 Americans reported struggling to afford food. Think about that. In the richest nation on earth, 85 million people are missing meals. And where is this pain felt most deeply? Rural America, small towns, farming communities, places like Hawaii's 2nd District, where food is grown, but life is hard. 87% of the counties with the highest food insecurity are rural. Families face fewer job opportunities, fewer doctors, fewer grocery stores, and now even fewer lifelines. And Republicans want to make it worse. This isn't just a bad bill. It's a big bad bill. It's a big ugly bill, a brutal assault on rural families, working parents, seniors, kids. The GOP plan is to slash $313 billion from SNAP, gut Medicaid, rip lifelines out of the hands of people just trying to survive, and hand billions in tax breaks to the ultra-wealthy. All this as part of the GOP tax scam 2.0. A reckless giveaway to billionaires that will add $5 trillion to our national debt. $5 trillion in tax breaks for the rich, paid for by taking food off tables and putting health care out of reach for working Americans. This isn't fiscal policy. It's moral failure. It's the wealthiest 10% cashing in at the expense of the poorest, most vulnerable, hardworking people who labor every day to hold on to life in communities too often forgotten. Let me tell you about Anna, a constituent of mine from the rural west side of Oahu. She and her husband run a small family business. Last year, just $200 more in monthly sales pushed them over the limit for SNAP. $200. That tiny increase cost their children meals. Anna told me she had to measure every scoop of rice at dinner. She couldn't say yes when her youngest child asked for a second helping of food. She sent her kids to school hungry. Months later, after their sales dropped again, Anna reapplied. They were approved, and she cried. But now Anna and her husband wonder every day, should we sell our home? Should we leave our community? That's the America we're creating, where a family's survival depends on a spreadsheet and, sadly, declining sales. Anna isn't a cheat. She isn't lazy. She's not gaming the system. She is the system, the engine and the heart of rural America, working, sacrificing, raising kids, building a future, and yet this bill punishes her. SNAP works. It feeds families and fuels local economies. Every SNAP dollar we know generates over $1.50 in economic activity. It supports farmers, grocers, small-town businesses. It breaks cycles of poverty, and Medicaid keeps rural hospitals open, keeps parents and kids healthy. It keeps people alive. Cutting these programs isn't just cruel, it's anti-American. But here's the truth. The cruelty is the point, because this bill is about priorities. The GOP's priorities is clear. Cater to the billionaires, crush the working families, and let's call it policy. They're ready to hand out massive tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans while robbing the rest of the country of food and care. That's not a budget. That's a betrayal. So yes, this bill will devastate rural America. It will mean more hunger, more closed clinics, more families like Anna's forced to consider giving up their homes, their communities, their dignity, so that billionaires can buy a third yacht and pay even less in taxes. But we have a choice. We can do the right thing. We can stand with the families who work hard and ask only for a fair shot. We can vote for policies that invest in people, not punish them. We can reject the GOP tax scam. We can protect SNAP. We can defend Medicaid. And we can refuse to balance budgets on the backs of people who can least afford it. This amendment is our choice. If you are confident rural America will not see SNAP cuts or decreased benefits, as the chair of the Agriculture Committee has claimed, then this amendment will do no harm. Vote yes. But if you have a concern, and quite frankly, a conscience, vote yes. Reject this big bad bill. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Ms. Bonamici, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My amendment, which is number 24, is pro-family, pro-children, and pro-mom. It guarantees that this bill will not take away nutrition benefits for moms and hungry kids in the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, or WIC. Federal nutrition programs like WIC and SNAP and school meals are investments in the health, learning, and development of children and young adults in communities across the country and are some of the most successful tools we have for reducing child hunger. These nutrition programs have been associated with improved educational outcomes and reduced food insecurity, which is especially important for children from low-income and food-insecure families. And it's widely known that WIC contributes to healthier births, nutritious diets, and improved infant feeding practices, better health care for children, and higher academic achievement. The benefits are indisputable. So WIC has served as a lifeline for many mothers and their young children, and I urge my colleagues to support my amendment. I would now like to make a few comments on amendments that I am either co-sponsoring or supporting. There is one by Ranking Member Bobby Scott to protect American children from going hungry with regard to the proposed cuts to SNAP. Yesterday, the Urban Institute released a new report highlighting that as many as 18.3 million children could lose access to free school meals as a result of the harmful provisions in this bill. And we know that every congressional district has children who are hungry. Families are working hard, but the income isn't keeping up with the cost. So I hope we can adopt Mr. Scott's amendment number 184. I also want to speak in support of a amendment that is going to be introduced or has been introduced by Representative Sykes to strike the language in the bill that cuts Medicaid. In Oregon, 1 in 3 people are covered by Medicaid, including 57% of Oregon children, and make no mistake, if you rip away health care from millions of Americans, people will die. Rural hospitals will close, cancer patients will go without treatment, and I will support this amendment, and proud to support this amendment. I also want to raise an issue in the amendment that is introduced by Representative Rivas, number 215. This is an amendment that will fix a catastrophic policy that's tucked quietly into this bill that would let the world's most powerful technology go unchecked for the next decade. This is a blank check for big tech. It would, and the bill as written will block state and local governments from regulating artificial intelligence for 10 years. That is a long time. That is a decade of risk. Let's be clear, we do not have federal policies or governance laws on data privacy, security, and bias. And I served on the bipartisan House AI task force, and we spent a long time studying these issues. And our report that was signed by both Republicans and Democrats explicitly warns against blanket and impulsive federal preemption of state AI policy. And I quote, "Without comprehensive federal AI or data privacy laws, states are well positioned to address gaps, tailor protections, and respond to emerging harms." But this bill ignores that bipartisan advice. Yesterday, 40 state attorneys general, including Oregon's Dan Rayfield, sent a bipartisan letter opposing this provision because of the unchecked harm it will cause. And let's talk about what that could look like. An algorithm that denies a disabled person access to housing and no state agency could intervene. A company that designs generative AI to imitate voices or faces without consent. States couldn't stop it. A hiring platform that discriminates by race or gender. Under this bill, if a company deliberately designs an algorithm that causes foreseeable harm, they'd be legally unaccountable, and it would leave policymakers and the public flying blind as a handful of corporations consolidate power over rapidly advancing technology. And I'm not talking about machines. I'm talking about civil rights, consumer safety, child protection, elections, employment, and more. The House AI Task Force made it clear we should empower good AI policy at the state level, not block it. This amendment strikes the provision and gets government out of the way so states can protect their people. Let's test whether Congress stands with the public or with the powerful. I also have a few bills I want to mention that, or excuse me, a few amendments that I'm co-sponsoring. One by Mr. Byer to keep energy costs low by taking two of the most successful energy policies in history, the production tax credit and the investment tax credit, protecting those. Also, Mr. Byer's amendment protecting bipartisan clean energy tax credits. I also want to support, be on record as supporting Ranking Member Bobby Scott's amendment number 261 that makes it harder for students, strikes the language that makes it harder for students to access high-quality education. And one more, Madam Chair, with your indulgence, I want to support the amendment by my Oregon colleague, Representative Bynum, that ensures the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau retains current funding for protecting student borrowers. And I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici. The order now is Goodlander, Stansberry, Delaney, and Tlaib. Okay, Goodlander.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member McGovern, for the opportunity to be here today on behalf of the people of New Hampshire's 2nd District to offer a common sense, one-sentence amendment to this truly big and catastrophically bad bill. We know the bill is big. I brought a copy with me. It doesn't fit on this very big table in front of me. This bill is catastrophically bad because of what it does and what it fails to do, and that's where my amendment comes in. This bill is catastrophically bad because we know what it's going to do to 14 million Americans who will lose health coverage. The biggest cuts to health care in American history. It's going to hurt our kids, people with disabilities, pregnant women, seniors. It's going to jack up health care costs for everyone. Rural hospitals in my state are going to close and people are going to die. We know this bill is catastrophically bad because of what it's going to do to the more than 10 million Americans who are at risk of losing access to food because of the biggest cuts to SNAP in American history. We're talking about kids, about veterans, about hardworking people all across our country and in the most rural parts of my district, in Berlin, in Stewartstown, in Winchester. People are going to lose access to food. And for what? To give another big tax giveaway to big corporations and to billionaires. This bill also is going to bring about the biggest deficit increase in American history, $3.8 trillion, and that's trillion with a T, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, and it's going to add trillions of dollars to the national debt. So this bill is bad for all the things it will do, but one of the things this bill will not do, and another reason why it's catastrophically bad, is what it fails to do to really make government work better for hardworking people and to actually cut down on waste, fraud, and abuse. And that's where my straightforward, common sense, one-sentence amendment comes in. Title II of this big bill provides nearly $150 billion to the Department of Defense, and does this, mind you, at a moment when that department is in a state of pure and utter chaos under the leadership of a person who has no business serving as the Secretary of Defense. That's a lot of money, $150 billion. It's 10 times the state of New Hampshire's biennial budget. It's also, I should note, $50 billion above what the House Armed Services Committee was instructed to spend in this bill. And I read every bill I vote on, and it's $50 billion above. So I'm offering a straightforward amendment. It's one sentence that would simply require the Department of Defense, before it is able to spend the additional $50 billion, to do what it is already required to do by law and what it has failed to do under law for decades now, and that is to pass an independent audit. This is about basic government oversight, but the Department of Defense has failed 7 audits. It is the only federal department that has failed an audit, and it also accounts for more than half of our discretionary spending. We're talking about $1 trillion. This is not right. If you really want to talk about cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, I'd ask the question, isn't ensuring a clean audit of the Pentagon a top priority? If you want to know whether we're actually wasting money, an audit is going to help us do exactly that. So look, at the end of the day, it's about military readiness, and that's something that our national security depends upon. It's something our economic security depends upon. It's also about the public's trust. Small businesses across this country, people across America, have got to pass an audit to keep doing what they do. The Pentagon should be held to the same standard. And it's the public's trust that our democracy depends on. And so with that, I would say this big, truly big and catastrophically bad bill cannot be cured with one amendment, but this is a step towards progress on what I think we all share, a goal we all share, cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. That is not what this bill does. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member, members of the committee. Before I get started, I just want to observe that we've been here for almost 12 hours, and I want to take a moment to thank all of the staff who've been holding it down for the last 12 hours in this room. And I want to also observe that I count exactly 2 Republicans in this room, while literally dozens of Democrats have sat here all night and all day to have 5 minutes in front of this committee to speak our piece on behalf of the American people. So I have a lot of ground to cover. If it's not obvious already, not only am I a no on this bill, I am a hell no. Let me tell you why. This bill puts a massive permanent tax break in place for the ultra wealthy and corporations on the backs of working Americans. It will literally make the poor people of this country poor while the rich get richer. It will give billions of dollars in kickbacks to defense contractors, private prisons, and big tech. It gives cuts to life-saving programs, Medicaid and healthcare, which all of you said you wouldn't cut for months, and here we are. Food assistance, school lunches, Pell Grants. It will decimate protections for the environment, NEPA, public lands, judicial review, climate and clean energy. It decimates protections for our federal workers. It makes them at will, and it threatens their retirement. It threatens our consumers. It eviscerates the federal budget. And, Madam Chair, despite what I have heard here for many hours of lying, it will put into place the largest increase in deficit spending this country has ever seen, ever. That is what this bill does, and that is why I oppose it. I'm here to present 6 amendments, one of which was voted down by the Republicans in oversight that would actually protect Medicaid, Social Security, veterans benefits, and food assistance. I'm also here to fight for a bill, an amendment to this bill that would make it impossible for people like Elon Musk and special government employees to self-deal and exploit the government for their own personal gain. I'm also here to present an amendment that would restore the protections for our tribal nations, because notwithstanding what I heard the chairman say in the dark of night in this room, this bill takes away the judicial rights of our tribal nations to defend their sacred lands and their tribal trust and treaty responsibilities, and it is shameful. It is absolutely shameful. I am also here to offer an amendment to restore climate funding that was cut out of our national budget, and I am here to present an amendment which the Republicans have already voted on in a number of different places and spaces that would make it impossible for our foreign adversaries to mine here in the United States and take advantage of our system. These are but a small offering to a 1,000-page bill that will literally kill Americans. This is but a small offering in the 500 amendments that my colleagues and I have waited all night and all day to present in this committee. So let me be perfectly clear. This bill will hurt the American people. It will raise the debt. It will give permanent tax breaks to the ultra wealthy. It will put billions of dollars into the pockets of Donald Trump's friends. It will cut life-saving programs. It will decimate protections for our communities. And it is happening on your watch, and we are here to fight it every step of the way in this committee, on the floor, in our communities, and we will not stop fighting. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, Ranking Member McGovern. And thanks to all the staff, I agree as well, who've been here. I got here around 3 in the morning, and I echo what many of my Democratic colleagues have said, but I just have to say, as a preamble, you know, many of the things I've said won't be repeating others, but my heart is heavy. As a freshman member from Maryland, but grew up in this great state of Idaho, and have lived here for 30 years, I've never seen anything like this in Washington. And I must say, I ran on common sense, common ground in my campaign, and there is none of that right here on on Capitol Hill. But that takes common ground, takes shared truths, and starting at least the same platform and the same set of facts, and shared value outputs. And I would think that we should come back together to really look at those things. The way in which we have not been able to really have hearings and an ability to really think and probe into all these issues is so important going forward. So my amendment, H313, is really about ensuring that children and families will continue to receive the food they need despite the proposals put forward in the package. In this country, I do think that we all agree, and many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in the Ag Committee believe that no child in this country should go hungry. My Republican colleagues repeatedly said that this package would not result in the kids going hungry and that benefits would remain whole for them. My amendment takes them at their word, and it seeks to ensure that no cuts to SNAP can be made unless the USDA and states confirm that these cuts will not lead to a reduction in benefits for households with kids. Taking Republicans at their word to prevent benefits that I would suspect they would want. In some nationally, 42 million currently depend on food assistance programs. And in my district, 1 in 9 households depends on SNAP. Half of them are children. This isn't just about ending hunger. It's about dignity, it's about opportunity, and it's about being able to concentrate in school and being able to thrive. And if you want to talk about economics, as we said before, SNAP pays for itself in economic benefits and health benefits. For every dollar in my district, but across the country, spent on SNAP, $1.50 comes back into our economies. And that means many of my farmers in District 6 sell into the food markets. It goes back to 2,700 national retailers and back to our truckers. Cutting SNAP hurts, not helps our national economy. And these cuts will even be more apparent in rural communities. And by the way, in rural communities, there is going to be a tsunami of issues that is going to impact them, not just with SNAP, but with Medicaid and all these core funding cuts, and it's going to hit our states as well. So let me just put another thing in it, and maybe it's the lawyer in me, but I dispute the GOP constant messaging that this is about financial discipline and tackling the deficit. None of these cuts to SNAP or to Medicaid or our social net programs result in this objective. The numbers do not add up, because we all know that it is widely acknowledged that this current proposal is projected to increase the budget by nearly $3 trillion through 2034 by locking in tax cuts and spending increases that outweigh reductions in Medicaid and SNAP funding. So let me put a finer point on this. It will strip $18 billion in benefits from households with children. It will harm 1 in 5 kids who rely on SNAP, and it lowers the age by which a child is considered dependent from 18 to 7. No one I know would argue that an 8 or a 10 or a 12-year-old is not dependent on their parents for food, housing, or care. And the authors of this bill have exempted families within this new definition of dependent only if they are married or living in the same household. But what about single or unmarried parents who are doing their best? This bill leaves them behind. Last, the bill prevents future increases to the Thrifty Food Plan. $37 billion will be cut from food assistance for the next decade, and that includes slashing $1 billion from summer EBT, which is a lifeline for millions of kids as they head into summer. I repeat, children will be hungrier over the summer. So it's about feeding our kids and about their future and our country's future. If you'll also allow me, Chairwoman Fox, I do not serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee, but I spent the bulk of my life as a child advocate at Common Sense Media. Common Sense is a nonprofit dedicated to looking at how media impacts the health and well-being of our nation's children vis-a-vis media. And the reports that came today about Sykes' bill, H215, is really important because we have to stand ahead of making sure that AI and the most recent proposals that it would block states from regulating it is really, really important not to. 140 organizations have already stepped against it. And I would also say for our nation's kids, we need to look at that. In closing, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I echo so much of what my colleagues have said, but I want to bring my district into this room. They're never going to be able to sit here in this audience and express just, anger that they feel that yet again we're turning our backs to them and not putting them before polluters, billionaires, and so much more. The reality is, and Madam Chair, and this is to everyone here, it is not just us saying it. It's nonpartisan organization looking at the numbers, looking at this budget. And it is our residents of all different likes, because to me, Medicaid is nonpartisan. I have met people of all different likes and backgrounds that are dependent on Medicaid. I have met so many people that are on SNAP, Madam Chair, and for all of my colleagues to understand, you all know many of our residents survivor mode. I'm not going to here to do shaming and blaming. The reality is we have broken systems in place, and we wonder why people look at Congress and shake their heads and the approval ratings are so low. It's because we don't put them first. And so I offered 6 amendments, Madam Chair, and I hope you all seriously take them into consideration. I have no health care cuts for moms and babies. This is important. As a founder of the Congressional Mamas Caucus, when I look at over 40% of births in our country are covered by Medicaid, but that's also prenatal care, postpartum. I mean, all the different things that you see. And I say this because, again, I'm bringing my district here. We have one of the worst infant mortality crises, and I mean, look at the crisis that we have in our country, but even in my backyard. And it's because we don't have the kind of care that we have. And Medicaid is a Band-Aid, y'all. It really is. Because we do have an inhumane, cruel healthcare system that's driven by profit and greed and not about healthcare. That's why a lot of my residents don't even call it a healthcare anymore. They call it sick care, Madam Chair. And so now we're about to rip the Band-Aid off. So my amendment says, do not cut prenatal and postnatal care. Again, tackling infant mortality is nonpartisan. Every community is, again, seeing that our children are not reaching the age of 1, and there's a reason to that. And again, it's because we're not doing our job here in Congress. The other amendment, and it's super important, is no money for polluters. I want to reiterate to all of you, again, my community, the majority of them are frontline communities. We have one of the worst air qualities in the state of Michigan, in Wayne County, that I represent. And we're making people sicker, and then now we're saying, we're not going to cover the fact that, again, we've allowed corporate polluters to be unchecked. You should see the lack of enforcement, because the bills are written in a way they slap their hands, they pay a fine, it's part of doing business. But when you go to read to a third grade class in my district, and I always tell them, they ask me what my job is, and I tell them I'm trying to make sure we have clean air and how many of you have asthma. A third of the class will raise their hand, Madam Chair. A third of them. And you look at the attendance rates and so forth. The other is really important. I really believe that we need no more aid to billionaires. I'm calling it that because I think that's how you all see it. They don't need it. The corporations don't need it. Some of them have not paid federal income tax for years. They don't need it. They're going to be okay, I promise. But I still remember the first Black woman ever elected in Congress, Shirley Chisholm, say that children can't learn if they're hungry. And I'm telling you, that is very real, but also children can't learn if they're being poisoned because they don't have clean water or clean air. And so I think it's incredibly important. My other amendment expand but don't restrict Medicaid. It is important to understand the importance of what Medicaid does right now. Again, the Band-Aid that I talked about, and we try to keep it tight. I know all of us that are fighting for Medicaid and making sure that we're expanding it and making it, again, closer to something a lot more humane. But I think it's incredibly important to understand this is life-saving. I've never had this many people in my community call me, parents with special needs children, petrified. They're so scared that we're going to put Amazon and FedEx and all these other corporations before them. That's what they're afraid of. And we wonder why they're so angry. My other amendment, again, is around no money for Pentagon, because I want to talk to you all about this. In my community, I tell them, don't worry, guess what? Guess what? There is one budget that got an increase. Which budget is that? The Pentagon budget. Can't pass audits, Madam Chair.
7 audits in a row. The last audit, the last failed audit, showed that over half of the assets of the Pentagon are unaccounted for. Unaccounted for. So we have money for bombs and wars. And shame on any of my colleagues that own stocks in war manufacturing. You shouldn't be voting on this bill. That's a conflict of interest. But Madam Chair, it's important to understand, we can't prioritize to build ships that can't float, planes that can't even fly in the rain. Trillions of dollars are going to that. And we're going to go ahead and fund it, $150 billion more dollars into talk about waste and inefficiency. It is cool for us to put more money in a budget that can't pass an audit, but we're going to go ahead and throw people off of Medicaid and SNAP. With that, Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Let me see if there are questions. Do you have any questions? No. Okay, Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, Madam Chair, first I want to ask you unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter from Jacek Furman, an economist and the former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors and the deputy director of the National Economic Council. In his letter, Mr. Furman shares an outlook of what this horrible bill will mean for our economy, and he writes, and I quote, "The legislation would drive up mortgage interest rates and inflation, lower economic growth, and ultimately require Congress to pass additional tax increases or benefit reductions. All of this would further hurt the working and middle class." So, Madam Chair, more expensive mortgages, higher inflation, basic needs like food and health care ripped away from people in need, all to give us more tax breaks for billionaires. I think it's shameful, and I think this bill will actually will hurt real everyday people. I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
And then the other thing I'm going to say is, I mean, let's remind ourselves why we're here, right? We're dealing with a bill that does a million different things. It's so wide in its scope. But, I mean, I think what has kind of brought us all together is our deep concern over people losing their health care, people losing their food assistance, all to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. And that's just unacceptable. And, I mean, we wouldn't be who we are as Democrats if we didn't fight this with every ounce of energy we have. There are other things in this bill. Ms. Bonamici, I'm glad you brought up the AI aspect of this. I am scared out of my mind that there will be a 10-year moratorium on states' ability to be able to kind of regulate AI in their within their boundaries. Congress should do it, but we can't get our act together here. So the idea that we just we'll let it go wild, I mean, there's some real dangers to our kids, to our communities, and so I thank you for raising that. But again, you know, I mean, I'm grateful to all of you for sticking this out. You know, we have been talking amongst ourselves about how incredible it is to see all of you just stay here and remain here in solidarity and to, you know, be able to present your amendments. I think the American people appreciate it, and so I support all your amendments. Again, I thank you for being here. I yield back my time.
Okay, thank you. I just want to echo the ranking member's remarks. There are dozens of members still waiting. We really, really appreciate your passion, your amendments, which are so well taken, everybody bringing their expertise that would have been probably better served if we'd been able to use regular order, use committee structure to try to work on consensus bills. But it is so important that your constituents hear what you would do if our colleagues across the aisle were willing to work in a bipartisan manner, and just how much we could accomplish if that were an option around here. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Mr. Neguse, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions. I just would, again, share the sentiments expressed by our ranking member and Ms. Scanlon, and our deep appreciation to our members of the House Democratic Caucus for hanging in and staying as long as you have. Again, we started this hearing at 1 a.m. It's now 1 p.m., so 12 hours later, and there are a number of you who have been here the entire time, all so that you could, as Representative Stansberry so eloquently put it, speak for 5 minutes on behalf of the communities that you serve, and to present very thoughtful, exceptional amendments that are developed by virtue of your expertise in your particular areas of expertise. And so I would just say thank you, and I hope that our colleagues on the other side might perhaps reconsider the closed nature of the rule. I suspect they won't, but hope springs eternal. So I thank my colleagues for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Neguse, and thanks to all of you. I also thank you for coming and staying for this period of time, and you're now excused. Mr. Jackson, Mr. Fields, Ms. Dean, Ms. Schulten, Mr. Mervan, Mr. Tonko, Mr. Mannion, Ms. Wasserman Schultz. If you could come into the seats these people are vacating, please.